Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Ashley struggled to open her eyes. She touched her head. The infernal pain was literally tearing her to pieces. There was a strange sour taste in her mouth. She tried to pull herself up, but her hand hit something leathery and cool. She pulled herself up and saw that she was in a spacious limousine. Looking around, Ashley realized that there was no one else in the car except her and the driver, who was sitting silently behind the wheel. "Who are you? Pull over. I'll call my father and he'll bury you right now." She panicked, searching the darkness of the seat for her purse to grab her phone, but there was nothing around. The chauffeur looked strangely in the mirror and grinned. "What's the use of calling? We've already arrived. The order is to take you to the registry office." He slowed down at the entrance. The driver got out of the car and, opening the back door, gave her a hand. "Please, they're waiting inside." Ashley didn't understand anything. Everything was happening as if in a dream. She tried to remember how she had gotten into the car, but her mind was a blur, deciding that it was a joke. And some of her friends once again decided to sign without warning. She walked unconfidently into the Palace of Marriage, passing by a huge full-wall mirror in the foyer. She decided to fix her hair, and at that moment, seeing her reflection, she stood like a stumbling block. Thoughts that she was invited as a guest vanished at once. In the mirror, she was looking at a natural bride in a gorgeous wedding dress with a little disheveled jewelry in her hair of small stones and flowers. Being in some semi-consciousness, she still ran her hand through her hair and slowly turned and walked towards the voices coming from somewhere. Every step she took up the wide white marble staircase seemed like an eternity. Once again, she tried to remember something of the last hours of her life, but there was nothing in her head at that moment except noise and a slight dizziness. Deciding that she had to figure out what had happened anyway, Ashley walked more determinedly into the hall, taking hold of the carved doorknob. She hesitated. For a moment, she was afraid. It seemed as if by taking another step, she could fall into the lair of terrible beasts or make an irreparable mistake. Grinning at her thoughts, Ashley stepped forward with determination. Light fools, my bright lights, and the huge number of guests dressed in expensive outfits made her squeeze her eyes shut. After standing there for a couple minutes with her eyes covered, she timidly lowered her hands, and the first thing she saw was the smiling faces of her father and stepmother. Her father was, as always, impeccable in his tuxedo and bow tie. Her stepmother, in a shining floor-length dress that sat perfectly on her figure, looked like from the cover of a fashion magazine. In her ears and on her chest glittered the diamonds she loved so much that cost no less than the whole registry office. At that moment, a familiar and annoying voice sounded into the microphone. "Olivia, my love, you're finally here. Ashley's been waiting for you. Gentlemen, I think we're good to go." Now that the bride has arrived, Ashley turned and saw Ethan, the son of her father's companion. The boy smiled wryly, letting her know that their last argument hadn't ended in his favor. Ashley remembered how recently they'd been in the same company, and Ethan, having had a few drinks, had said, "Enough of this nonsense. If our fathers decided to merge the business, then so be it. Like it or not, you're going to be my wife soon. You'll see in a month or so you'll be mine." At that moment, he even tried to kiss her, as if to confirm the almost fait accompli. But despite her education and patience, Ashley couldn't stand it and sent him off. They never saw each other again after that time. But that was not the end of their marriage. Henry, Ashley's father, had dreamed of marrying her to Ethan, not wanting anyone else to marry his only daughter. Her father kept saying that she should take a closer look at Ethan and try to develop a relationship with him. Lately, though, she had begun to realize that her father cared more about bringing the business and their families together than her personal happiness. Each time such conversations with her father ended with Laura running off to her room and slamming the door loudly, letting him know that the subject was closed to her. In the hall, Henry, catching his daughter's angry look, hurried over to her and, changing his smile to a pleading look, spoke softly. "Daughter, I'm sorry. It's all for your own good. I'll try to explain it to you later. In the meantime, trust that it's best for everyone." He kissed his daughter, gave her his hand in a gallant manner, and led her to the man she was to consider her fiancé. At that moment, Ashley, surprising herself, made the decision to obey her father. There was something in his voice that made it clear that this was a very hard step for him, but it turned out to be not all unpleasant surprises. Thanks to the representative of the registry office ready to hold a solemn marriage ceremony, a handsome man from the witnesses. Ashley couldn't believe it, but near the witness, whom she didn't even know, stood her best friend Jennifer. At this point, the bride began to remember everything. Just in the morning, her friend had called to say that she was getting married in a hurry. She was in a position, she begged her to go and pick out a dress. Ashley remembered everything from that morning. They'd met, even gone to a few salons. She wondered where her friend had gotten the money for such expensive bridal boutiques. Jennifer worked as a manager at the travel agency that Ashley had once used to book her trip. That they became very close, and for several years now they had been talking like best friends. When asked about money, Jennifer waved off the question, saying that her fiancé was making good money at his freelance work, and he'd gotten some kind of inheritance. It was all said so convincingly that Ashley didn't even have any doubts. After going to several bridal salons, Jennifer, citing fatigue, saying that it was hard to be in the position, began to beg to try on her favorite dress instead. Ashley gave in to her friend this time. When the corset was tightened, Jennifer cried out enthusiastically, "Awesome! I'm totally taking it, but I could use some flowers or beads, some hair and shoes. We're the same size anyway." Ashley replied, "No, please tell me." Ashley, standing in the middle of the hall, remembered that she was very uncomfortable with the whole thing, but she couldn't say no to a friend, especially one who was pregnant, so she agreed. "Thank you so much. You helped me out. Let me pour you some water for that. Sorry, I'll have champagne later." Jennifer handed her a glass of water. After drinking it, Ashley didn't remember anything else until she woke up in the car. Now this same friend, Jennifer, trying not to look the bride in the eye, was drinking champagne with a witness and trying her best to flirt with him. Ashley, pulling her hand out of her father's palm, walked right up to her friend and, holding back her emotions, "Step, how could you? You're my best friend. I trusted you in everything, shared everything with you." But Jennifer was surprisingly not confused, but only said in a near whisper, "What could I do? Your father started this whole dress plan and said if I didn't help, I'd be out of a job. You know the connections he has. I agreed to do it. After all, unlike you, I don't have rich parents and I don't have a fiancé like that either. I'm sorry, but before the birth, Ashley, Ethan is a normal guy. His parents have a business several times the size of yours. Anyone would run for him." Ashley looked her straight in the eye and replied angrily, "Not just anyone. Thank you. My friend arranged my happiness too. You can arrange yours." She turned around and, seeing this crowd of local nobles smiling falsely at each other, holding back tears, she sprinted out of the hall. The last thing she heard were her stepmother's words, "It's okay, but it's okay." This is a very important step for any girl to take. Let Ashley get her thoughts together. In the meantime, please raise a glass to us, to our parents, so to speak. Ashley was ready to go back into the auditorium and nail that bitch. How could she even consider herself one of her parents? Ashley didn't remember her mom. Her dad said she died in childbirth. Melissa, our stepmother, had made an unforgettable mark on her life by coming into the family when Laura was about 5. She especially tried her best to get everything she could out of her father. She lived in her own pleasure, went to beauty salons, fitness clubs, went abroad on vacation, mostly without her dad. And taking Laura with her was out of the question. There was not a single time that when Laura was sick as a child, Melissa sat by her crib, took pity, or read a story. And all that the girl remembered was "Sorry, not before you, very busy. And at best lie down, I'll be right there." After which Laura fell asleep, never having waited for the promised. Now she was sitting in a beautiful rubber chair in the foyer of the registry office, and tears were running down her cheeks. She thought only of one thing, that if her mother were alive, she would not have hurt her. Her father, having married her stepmother, was getting farther and farther away every year. If Laura hadn't realized it when she was a child, then as a teenager, they grew farther apart with each passing year. As president of a huge corporation, Henry had spoiled Laura at first, never refusing her anything, but when Melissa came along, he spent less and less time with his daughter. In recent years, their relationship hadn't been going well at all. Ashley felt as if her father had traded her for Melissa, and she tried to do everything to spite him. She spent all the money her father gave her left and right, even if she didn't need it all. A couple times her dad even put a limit on her cards, but then he'd back off pretty quickly and everything would go back to normal. Sometimes Ashley even felt like her dad was trying to buy her off, so he wouldn't interfere with her relationship with her stepmother. But at the same time, she knew her father would always be there for her when she needed. Ashley wiped her eyes and exclaimed silently, thinking that she was probably wrong. Dad is the only person on the entire planet who is family. He probably did wish her well. She had put up with his nerves for so long without trying to understand. It was only now that she thought about the fact that her father had changed a lot lately. She didn't even wonder why. After sitting in the semi-darkness for a while longer, Jessica decided to go back into the hall after all and try to talk to her dad. It was as if nothing had happened, and the guests from somewhere else were still there. And it seemed to Laura that in a little while the hall would be overcrowded. It was only now that she noticed that everything had been arranged to perfection. Arches, angels walking around the hall, a huge number of flowers, and more correspondence arriving every minute. A few even tried to interview her. But realizing that it was useless, they shifted all their attention to the groom. Ethan, however, was only too happy to do so. He trumpeted his love for Laura left and right, and she noted that he would make a good actor. It was believable enough, and in another case she might have believed it, but not in this moment. Taking a moment, Ethan walked over to her and putting his arm around her shoulders, said quietly, "Well, bride, I told you we'd get married. Just one more hour and you'll be legally wed." Feeling that Laura wanted to break free and leave, he squeezed her hand painfully and coming closer, whispered in her ear, "I don't advise you to make a move. You better smile. It's not you I want. It's your father's family business. You know that your father is on the verge of bankruptcy, and only a merger of our empires, so to speak, can save your family. So I'm waiting, my future wife." Or rather, a couple minutes later, a very real wife. "Thank you for saving us from poverty, and of course, breakfast in bed." He, as if nothing had happened, smiling, went back to the correspondence, and the bride looked at her father confusedly. He really did look as if he had aged lately. Olivia hadn't noticed it at all. Only now she realized why her father had been absent from work all day and always came back after midnight very tired. Ashley could see why he was often up at night, smoking nervously in his office, studying and calculating. She walked over determinedly and asked quietly, "Do you really need this wedding so much? Will it be able to help you?" In response, Henry lowered his eyes and also said quietly, "I'm sorry, daughter, I'm sorry if you can." Ashley had already realized only a few people knew about her wedding reception, the ones who had set up this plot. So she decided since her father needed her so much, she would get married. Walking over to the groom, Ashley took him under her arm and whispered, "Consider it yours for tonight. But there can be no wedding night and no breakfast in bed. I'll talk to my father later." Ethan smirked and replied, "Well, we'll see about that." From all that had happened, she concluded that Dad needed her marriage to Ethan for some reason, so she decided not to dishonor him by running away and accept everything as necessary. With rings, ceremony was held according to all canons, with rings and Mendelssohn's waltz. Journalists tried to cover the event from every angle. Ashley already imagined that the next morning the covers of almost all local publications would be full of their joint photos, but that didn't make her happy. She sat through most of the evening as if the event had nothing to do with her. The groom, on the contrary, was having fun in the circle of his friends and occasionally, as if mocking, winked at her. "Have fun, you're like a funeral," she heard her father's voice behind her. Henry walked over to their table, sat down in the chair next to them and spoke. "I know you're very angry about all this, but I had no other choice. I can't keep quiet any longer. Come on, let's go outside and talk." Without asking any questions, Jessica got up and followed him. She sensed that her father needed to talk, and she wanted to get to the bottom of it. They went down to the first floor of the restaurant where they were celebrating the wedding and sat on the big couch in the foyer by the window. "Ashley, I hid it for a long time. I didn't want to upset you. Did you think there was some mistake? But now I know for sure there is no mistake. I'm seriously ill. The doctors have double-checked it several times, but there's almost no chance. Business, on the other hand, needs a steady hand. So I thought, while you're still too young to make the mistake of marrying a rogue, our family business could fall apart. And Ethan's got a good grip." He's good at business. His brothers Jason and a few others have been on board for years. Jason's been suggesting a merger of our corporations for a long time. I finally agreed. Henry fell silent and, taking a pill from his inside jacket pocket, placed it under his tongue with a trembling hand. "Daddy, are you sick?" Ashley asked fearfully. Smiling sadly, Henry took her hand in his. "I'm fine. I feel bad a lot now, but I'm used to it. Listen, Ethan's a good guy. He's just a little spoiled, but I think once he marries you, he'll grow up quickly and take charge." Ashley had to be sure that when her father died, she wouldn't be poor. Her marriage could save their business and therefore her. At this point, Ashley couldn't tell if she fully believed her father, but the deed was done and she was now the legal spouse of this spoiled rich man. She wanted to believe that the marriage was really necessary for her father, and that was the only thing that could justify her crazy marriage. Gently releasing her hand from her father's arm, she looked him in the eye and, rising from the sofa, "Let's go to the hall, Daddy. But know this, if it hadn't been for you, I would never have married that bastard. To me, it's nothing but a sham marriage. As you say, to save our business, but nothing more. And the first chance I get, I will happily divorce him. And nothing can stop me now." Play returned to the hall, where the guests were enjoying themselves. No one even noticed that the bride was not there all this time. To her surprise, the newly married husband immediately came to her and, putting his arm around her waist, whispered in her ear, "Where have you been, my dear? I've already missed you. Although, judging by the face of your father and yours, I realize that you were not absent for nothing. I hope he was able to explain to you that I'm not the one who needs you. You probably have to pretend to be the perfect spouse so you won't be penniless." At that moment, the heated guests began to shout bitter, under the joyful cries of the host. Before Laura even had time to realize it, Ethan had pulled her to him and nestled his lips against hers. He held her so tightly that there was no way to pull away. When the cries died down, Ashley was able to free herself, and she grinned through gritted teeth, giving him the gentle smile of a loving lion. "Don't you dare do that again. If I agreed to this marriage, it doesn't change anything for you. I hated you, and I still hate you. And the fact that I have to live under the same roof with you for this circus is a sham. There's no wedding night or marital idyll waiting for you. Get it through your head." Ethan grinned and pulled her to the dance floor, where a slow song was playing. Ashley knew he was mocking her, but she clenched her teeth and held on through the wedding feast, realizing that she'd agreed to it. Ethan's parents had given them a spacious 2-bedroom apartment right in the center of town, promising to help them build a house. It was as if they believed in the seriousness of this registration and even said something about grandchildren, although Laura allowed for the idea that they might not have known about how she had been sedated and cunningly forced to marry their son because Jennifer, after drinking a lot of champagne and trying to make up, "Don't worry about how you got here. Only Ethan, me and your father know. Melissa's your stepmother though, Olivia too, I think. So it's more fun to look up to Ethan. He's a great guy." But Ashley didn't care how she ended up at the registry office. For her, the outcome was sad. Now she had to, at least until she figured out what was wrong with her father, pretend to be happily married in public. After all, already the whole town was discussing their marriage. Finding herself in the perfect abandoned apartment after the wedding, Ashley decided to set the record straight right from the doorstep. "So, my dear husband," Olivia began in a belligerent tone as she looked around the new apartment. And then she continued, "Now you're going to show me my room, where I'm going to live while we're married, and it has to be as far away from yours as possible." And somehow completely calmly immediately answers, "As you say, let's go. Will you be satisfied?" He approached one of the doors. He waited until Ashley came closer and swung it open. Voila, the marital bed was ready. "What's up? Let's go give each other the very duty that a lawful husband and wife should give to each other." Ashley stood at the doorway in confusion. In the middle of the spacious room stood a huge white bed covered with rose petals, a bottle of champagne, a bucket of ice, 2 glasses, and fruit stood on a round table nearby. She only woke up when Ethan gave her a gentle nudge. "Come on in, please, don't be shy, and as they say, get undressed," he said snidely. Ashley turned around and looked him straight in the eye and said, "You tried to lay a finger on me, and you'll be distracting your girlfriends with that stuff. even though you're out of the way. I can't see you." Pushing him away, Jessica walked out and opened the door of the next room and saw a small, cozy room. It looked more like the guest room that had been in her father's house. There was nothing extra in the room, but it was also quite cozy. The soft blue curtains were harmonious, matching the color of the sofa upholstery and wallpaper. Besides, the room had a closet with mirrored doors, a round glass table with a bronze lamp in the form of a flying girl, and on the wall opposite hung a small television. As she looked around, Ashley was happy to note that this was just what she needed as a temporary refuge from her spoiled spouse. Only at that moment did she realize that she didn't have any personal belongings with her. There wasn't even anything to change into. But the emotions of the past day and fatigue were stronger than this petty problem, which she immediately put aside for the morning. Ashley opened the closets, happy to find several sets of bed linens, a pillow, and a plaid, taking out only the plaid. She climbed with her feet on the couch and snuggled in, falling asleep right into her dress the minute she did. Ashley slept dreamlessly, not even waking up once. She only got up when the smell of coffee wafted from somewhere. She stretched, smiling happily, but when she saw her wedding dress on, she remembered the nightmare of the previous day. She had to get used to the idea that in the near future, so to speak, not to embarrass her father, she would have to live with her now legal spouse. And then we can get a divorce. She opened the door quietly. She went out into the corridor and almost immediately heard, "Well, I dreamed that I would get married and get coffee and breakfast in bed, and now I have to cook it myself. I suggest we have a cup of coffee to reconcile and discuss our future married life." Surprisingly, he didn't sound ironic. Ashley agreed, thinking that they really needed to talk. She took a few sips of her drink and said, "You and I have nothing to talk about." If her father didn't want it, Ashley would have left the registry office. Now that the whole town is talking about their marriage, she can't embarrass him. And for a while, alas, she'll have to live in this apartment, pretending to be happily married. Ashley's already picked out a room. When the fuss dies down, she'll file for divorce. "You shouldn't do that," Ethan said sadly. "I really like you, and I like not a bad guy. Maybe something good could come out of our marriage." Ashley jumped up from her chair, almost knocking over the hot drink, and, trying to restrain herself, almost shouted, "Why are you such a great guy?" Not humanly, so to speak, old-fashioned with courtship, kissing the moon did not start our relationship. It is to think, to put sleeping pills and forcefully bring to the registry office. "I won't forgive you or your father for that. All you can do to make it up to me is take me home to get my things. I have to live here now. And of course, I didn't take care of it beforehand. I didn't know it was so easy to get married in someone else's house." Then took her hand and calmly say, "Well, everything. Calm down, finish your coffee. I will now get ready and we'll go for things. Well, you cannot stand at the stove in a wedding dress." At that moment, he winked slyly, which made Ashley literally freak out and grabbed a small spoon from the table and threw it at the insolent man. Ethan deftly dodged it and laughed, leaving the kitchen, where he returned a minute later with the car keys. At her father's house, Ashley quickly gathered the essentials, not wanting to see her stepmother. A half hour later, she was back in Ethan's car. He glanced at the back seat, where the 2 suitcases the gardener had brought were lying, and grinned. "Not much. Not a lot of clothes for a pampered beauty like you." To which she, without thinking, sharply replied, "You're a husband now, so you'll buy everything new. So to speak, in a new life, with new clothes." She immediately turned away and looked out the window, signaling that the conversation was over. All the way to their new place, both of them were silent. When they parked in the lot, Ethan got out of the car, but still silently, he pulled the suitcases out of the back seat and put them on the ground, looking at Ashley in surprise. "What are we sitting around waiting for? Why don't you open the door?" he asked indignantly, fumbling with his keys. Ashley grudgingly got out of the car. She slammed the door with all her might. "Watch it," Ethan shouted at her as he closed the car. He turned the car around and walked toward the driveway. Then, as if remembering something, he turned and with a sweet smile said, "What is it? Take the suitcases, go. You already know the address." Ashley wanted to say what she thought of the bastard, but decided not to make a scene in the street. Lucky for her, the suitcases were on wheels, and she began to roll them up to the house one by one. She saw that Ethan stood defiantly with his hands in his pockets and grinned. At that moment, she was ready to kill the bastard. But again, she silently swallowed her resentment. "All right, take advantage of my kindness. Let me carry your bag. Maybe I can change your anger into mercy." Ethan nimbly picked up both suitcases and carried them into the entryway. At that moment, Ashley noticed for the first time how perfect his figure was. It was obvious that Ethan was a regular at the gym as well as the clubs. Ashley shook her head as if to ward off such thoughts and followed. Once in the apartment, she sorted through her things and decided to call her father. It was strange to her that he hadn't even bothered in the past 12 hours. Olivia couldn't get through to her dad, even though Laura had dialed several times. She couldn't get the conversation about the wedding out of her head. She quickly pulled herself together and tried to slip out of the house while her new husband was talking to someone in the next room. 20 minutes later, she was already walking into their company's office. Jessica, her father's secretary, was surprised to see Ashley. "Ashley, hello. You're here? How's your dad feeling?" she asked in a tragic voice. Ashley was confused by the question. She was sure her father was at the office. "Isn't he at work? The last time I saw him was yesterday at the wedding. Did something happen that I don't know about?" Ashley asked back and felt her heart sink. She'd heard from the receptionist that her father had been taken away by ambulance last night. His condition had worsened, and he was in the hospital under the care of doctors. Ashley hailed a cab and rushed there. On the way, she couldn't help thinking that her stepmother hadn't even bothered to tell her. Ashley knew for a fact that when she'd come to get her things in the morning, she'd been in her room at home and hadn't even come out. When she got to the hospital, she went straight to the head of the department. He told her how serious the disease was. She immediately went to her father's room, opening the door. Ashley rushed to the bed where her father lay white as a sheet. "Daddy, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I didn't believe you were serious about the disease," she said, crying. He opened his eyes and faintly said, "What's wrong, baby? I understand yesterday you still did not believe anything. After all, I arranged such a thing. But that's beside the point. My crime against you. There's one more thing I have to tell you that's very important. I love you very much, and you know it, no matter what happens between us. But you're not my family. Give me some water, please." He took a few sips, and from the glass Ashley held out to him, looking at his daughter appreciatively, he continued, "It was a long time ago. I loved a girl and wooed her passionately. Her name was Olivia, your mother. She was choosing one of us at the time, but life worked itself out. This guy got involved in some kind of criminal enterprise. Probably ended up in prison. I don't know how he got in touch with me through his lawyer. He's the one who told me Olivia was pregnant and the baby was his. He begged me to take care of Olivia and the babies, to put him on my payroll, and in return he gave me the stash of what he and associates had looted, knowing that with their prison records, they wouldn't be out for another 25 years. He was given much less as a first move, but his accomplices were sentenced to a full sentence. I'll be honest with you, I was very happy. Not so much the gold and silver, but I could marry Olivia. I was very fond of that one. And then you were born, Ashley. Olivia died. That's how I became your father, started my own business and raised you. Now it's payback time." And then was shocked at what she heard and quietly asked, "And then what happened to him? My biological father. I mean, he's probably been released by now. Didn't he want to find me?" "At the time, he didn't want to cast a stain on you about his biography. Perhaps he thinks so now, too. I haven't seen him since. Some say he escaped from prison, walked away. And some say that they found his body mauled by bears about 10 years ago. They mauled the poor guy on his way to freedom." Laura listened, tears running down her cheeks. It frightened her to realize that on the whole planet it was like this. She no longer had a single soul mate. She realized, of course, that her father was the one who had raised her. But he too, according to the doctor, might not have lived more than a month. Reaching out, Henry stroked her head and said in a weak voice, "Forgive me, my daughter, if you can. Don't hold a grudge, and no matter what happens to me, know that I loved and love you very much. Now leave me alone, please. I'm tired." All the way home, Laura thought about what she had heard and couldn't believe it was all happening to her. As the cab pulled up to the house, the phone rang. The hospital said that almost as soon as she left, her father was gone. It was as if he had said his most intimate thing and was relieved. sign roll past as if in a fog. She looked up at her stepmother and noticed that she hadn't shed a single tear. Melissa showed up like a regular party, only dressed in black. The short dress just above her knees, the hat, her flawless makeup made it hard to believe that she was burying her spouse. It felt like she was even glad it had happened that way. Not wanting to watch what was happening, Ashley decided to take a walk to her mother's grave, which was nearby. As she was walking back, she overheard Melissa and her father-in-law Jason talking quite casually. "I did everything you wanted me to do," her stepmother was saying. "Married that idiot. Don't you know what it's like to sleep with someone you don't love? Fulfilling your every whim, talked him into marrying off his daughter to your son so you could take over the man's business. In return, you promised to leave your wife, said we'd be together forever. It worked out even better than that. Now I'm a widow. We can quite officially get married, and the business merged." Melissa said this quite emotionally, trying to wrap her arms around her father-in-law's neck, and the man pulling her arms away. "Sati, don't rush things. The ground hasn't cooled yet, and you're already ready to wag your tail. And the business, sorry, not yet united. You'll see it through to the end. Then we'll do the hustle." Ashley stood back behind the large tombstones, afraid to move. The fact that she'd buried her father despite his confession was still like that to her. Then there was the fact that her stepmother was in cahoots with her father-in-law, which meant her spouse was involved. Melissa didn't calm down and kept talking to her lawyer. "I'll help you with the business to keep things honest. And you help me get his daughter out of the house so she has no rights to it. After all, when you're widowed anyway, it will all be ours in common, as a family." "Really?" she asked. "Give me a kiss, please. And let's go. There's probably a wake starting already. We need to play the widow role a little more." They kissed for a few more minutes, then walked to the car, and Ashley was left standing at a loss, huddled against an old oak tree, as if trying to get strength from it. How long had she stood like that? She didn't know, but she clearly decided that she would fight to the last for her father's cause by going to the wake after the cemetery. Ashley saw Melissa unashamedly surrounding her late husband's father with care and was ready to tear both of them apart. After returning from the wake, Ashley stayed up all night thinking about how she was going to live her life. In the morning, Ethan woke up usually earlier, seeing her already with hair, makeup in the kitchen. Surprised, he asked, "Where are you going so early? Why don't you make me some coffee, since you're still my wife?" Ashley calmly replied, "You said it. I'm going to work. Starting today, I'll be taking over Dad's business on my own. I guess he didn't pay for my finance degree abroad for nothing," she said as she entered her father's reception area. She was glad to see that the secretary was still the same, and from the threshold she asked, "Barbara, good morning. What's happened? Where did so many new employees come from? After all, in the last few years, coming to see my father, I knew almost everyone by sight." Elton came closer to her and said it almost in a whisper, "Well, while you were busy with the funeral and your father's illness, Melissa dispersed the old guard in no time, hired only people she liked. They're looking her in the mouth now. Just don't give me away. I have a daughter raising grandchildren. I need money. I help with my paycheck. Don't worry, Barbara. I'll be taking over my father's business from today, which means no one will fire you while I'm here. Please go and get the team together for about 12 hours somewhere. I will talk about our future work together." Having continued her speech in advance, she spent a long time explaining to the staff the plans for the future, but she could see in her eyes that those whom her stepmother had recruited believed only her. She was confused, not knowing what to do next. At that moment, Petrovna came up to her. That's what her father called the elderly cleaning lady. He always said that she had been working since the founding of their company and knew everything and every... "Ashley, let's step back," she asked timidly. "Sure, you're one of the few people I know here," Ashley replied good-naturedly. "That's the very thing." Petrovna told her all the people Melissa recruited were originally against the owner's daughter. "But I've known you from childhood," grandmother went on to say. "Henry brought you here as a little girl and told you that the Harris would run the business. But I see you have many enemies now, so I thought I'd let you in on a secret I know. He's got something here in his office. He told me in confidence to give it only to you. Maybe something necessary and important." What was Jessica's surprise when inside, hidden behind the book racks from the safe, Olivia found only one photograph. It showed two young, handsome guys standing with a fragile girl between them. On the back were written their names in the year. Tucking the picture into her pocket, she returned the racks to their original place and almost immediately forgot about it. By lunchtime, her stepmother arrived at the office, surrounded by Ethan and his father. She naively started talking about how she needed more rest, that losing a loved one was a major mental trauma, and it was very difficult to get back to normal afterward. But realizing that this would not change Ashley's fighting spirit, left her alone. For a while, however, every now and then Melissa or Ethan's father would try to find out what she was interested in, offered their help. Alyssa had even been thoughtful enough to make her coffee and bring it to her, offering to chat. Ashley had sensed a strange flavor in the drink, but she hadn't given it much thought. From that day on, she continued to drive to her father's office every morning and tried to get things done. But by evening, it was like she'd been replaced. Ashley didn't want to live. She was tired, and she wanted to howl with loneliness. It wasn't like her, but she couldn't do anything about it, writing it off as psychological trauma. The girl really hoped that soon everything would pass, but everything ended quite unexpectedly. At the end of one of these days, Ashley had a real hysteria. She sobbed through everything that came under her hand and woke up when people in white coats were bending over her. And the stepmother said, "The girl's father is dead. You see, she's not herself anymore. She's doing whatever she wants. You'd better make her well, and we're willing to pay any amount of money. You know, we don't want any trouble, so her stay is guaranteed to be as far away from the city as possible, so no one will find out." Ashley heard this whole conversation as if through absorbent cotton or a veil. All she could think about was how it was possible that she had gone crazy, because everything that was going on said exactly that. She was given some kind of injection, and Ashley woke up later in the ward of the asylum, which was filled with 10 people who were completely inadequate. She decided to pretend to be sick, even learning to hide the pills in her mouth so she could spit them out after the orderlies left. True, one day one of them, the one who had been looking at her strangely since the first day, whispered, "I understand everything, and I'm ready to help you. You're not crazy. You don't even need to see a doctor. I'll try to organize your escape. But I'll tell you right away, this institution is a paid one, and the security here is quite serious. Just please don't try to do it yourself. Blink your eyes if you agree." Ashley was surprised, but blinked immediately. "That's good. Come on, get to bed. They say the morning is wiser in the evening." That night, Ashley slept until the wee hours of the morning without waking once, as if she felt like she had a guardian angel. A few days later, her benefactor entered the room first thing in the morning and came up to her and said, menacing, "You have an urgent appointment for a procedure. Let's go." Moving closer, he whispered, "Don't be afraid of anything. Come with me." He silently led her out of the ward and discreetly hid her in the car. Taking the laundry to the laundromat, he whispered one last time, "Take care of yourself. You're very pretty. In the pocket of your jacket is my phone number. Always help if I can. As soon as you pass security, my advice to you is to run. They'll be looking for you with dogs. I'll try to cover for you, of course, but it's better to get away as soon as possible." Ashley heeded his advice a couple of kilometers from her private facility, got out from under a bag of stinky hospital underwear and jumped out of the car at one of the corners. Where to go? She didn't understand, but remembering the orderly's admonition, she went to the right. Olivia thought the guy knew the neighborhood and signs, which meant he must have lived here. As soon as Ashley stepped into the woods, a growl sounded from behind the trees. Immediately, Olivia saw wolves coming from all directions, ready to tear their prey apart. "Oh my God," she almost whispered, and then, as fast as she could, she screamed for help. Laura thought her life was over, but at that moment a shot rang out. Behind her, a harsh male voice shouted, "Hey, get out of here." "Found me a victim, too." Ashley turned around and saw a bearded man holding a shotgun. Olivia immediately took a frightened step behind his back and squirmed, waiting for the denouement. As soon as the predators scattered, the stranger offered to help, and they moved deeper into the forest, where they soon found themselves in a clearing. "Listen, it stood a good-sized hut, but this is where I live. Please make yourself at home. You can hang your clothes in the hallway, and your room is to the right," said the stranger. Ashley began to take off her jacket, and suddenly, a photograph slipped out of her pockets. It fell, as if on purpose, at the owner's feet. He picked it up easily from the floor and looked at it for a long time, and suddenly, in a voice trembling with excitement, asked, Where did you get that picture? Ashley was stunned. The hermit, who had just seemed so stern, living without fear in the woods, stood looking at the photo and crying. It turned out that one of the three was him as a young man. From his story, Ashley immediately realized it was her biological father. Then they sat in the small kitchen and talked to each other for a long time about their lives. Taking Ashley's hand, her father quietly said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I really wanted to find your mom and you when I was free, but I decided not to ruin your life after all. It was time for me to come back from the dead. Besides, the statute of limitations on my case is long since expired, so we'll still have a fight on our hands with your newfound family. I'll go into town tomorrow for starters. I have an acquaintance there. He'll help me find a good lawyer, and we'll get your divorce finalized. There are no children, so everything will be in absentia." My father offered to stay with him until the divorce was finalized, and the next morning he left for a whole day in the city. When he came back, he happily said, "That's it, we're leaving tomorrow. You will sign all the necessary documents." The lawyer said, "A couple of days, and you'll be a completely free girl again. By the way, you don't have to be afraid of your relatives anymore. I had a talk with them, so to speak. Said if anything ever happens to you again, I'll put them away." The conversation wasn't in such a cultured way, of course, but he smiled for the first time since they'd known each other, and Ashley felt like she was definitely protected now. The divorce had indeed gone through without her involvement, and Ashley was glad that this family of swindlers had not had time to take over the business. Ethan and his father tried to talk her out of the divorce, and when they realized that the decision is unchangeable, literally went mad with anger. Stepmother made plans for a life together with her former father-in-law. They thought they had a rich future, but it turned out that the man never intended to divorce and just used Melissa as a spy and informer in the camp of the enemy. Now that Laura has divorced and taken control of the business, her former father-in-law has sent Melissa away and threatened to lock her up in the same asylum from which Ashley escaped. Ethan Peter, the girl's biological father, sold his house and settled in the city, organized all the necessary documents to return to normal life, and began to help Ashley in everything. He, of course, did not understand much about modern business, but his daughter supported him and calmed him down. She thought that with such diligence and willpower in 6 months, he would understand everything as well as she did. You can see how her father tries to immerse himself in everything and get into every detail. Ashley was also grateful that he'd managed to talk to her family so well that they'd never come her way again. All this time, she hadn't forgotten the orderly from the asylum, the one who'd helped her escape. She wanted to thank him very much, and then one day she did. She called Ashley's voice, realized the Savior's name was Gregory. He was very happy to hear from her and immediately offered to meet her. They spent the evening wandering the streets of the city, telling each other about themselves. It turned out that Gregory was married, but his wife ran away with her lover many years ago and even filed for divorce. At the same time, a young daughter left with Daddy. He spoke enthusiastically about little Emily and then sadly said, "Well, that's what I am, not an enviable beau. Daughter in my arms, and also Mom is very sick. She hasn't gotten up in months. She needs surgery on her spine, which costs a lot of money. Don't think I'm complaining. It's just so easy to talk to you like I've known you for 100 years. Ashley had the exact same feeling. It was like Gregory was her soulmate, like her in many ways and complementary to her. For the first time, she felt light and cozy. She wanted to snuggle up next to him and not let go. From that evening, they began to meet regularly. Gregory introduced Ashley to Emily's daughter. Emily immediately became attached to her and didn't want to part with her, each time tearfully begging her not to leave. Ethan Peter, having met Gregory, immediately approved the choice of his daughter. This is a real man, and it does not matter what kind of wealth he has. The important thing is the soul, and a man who is raising a little girl cannot be a rotten. When his father heard about his mother's illness, he said, "Daughter, of course, you have the right to decide for yourself, but I think the man who saved your life is worthy of saving his loved one. Let's go talk to Gregory, get his mom into the hospital, and then I think we can pay for the treatment. Things are looking up. I'm starting to get into it, as you can see. So this sum will not be critical for us." Ashley agreed immediately, noting that her father had really gotten into things quickly. That same day, Olivia surprised Gregory with her and her father's decision. He agreed. "Thank you so much. I will definitely give everything back, though gradually. but I will definitely return it. I just don't want to waste time, of course. The disease is progressing. The main thing is to save my mom, and then I will work and return it. 1 week later, after a successful operation, a small company gathered in the room of Barbara, Gregory's mother. Ethan Peter, holding out a bouquet, said, "Gregory, I could not even think what a beautiful mom you have." And the man had long ago asked to visit. The woman blushed, embarrassed, replied, "What are you talking about? What beauty on a hospital bed?" "Nothing. You'll be dancing soon," Gregory said with a smile and added, "And it's all thanks to these kind people." Again, Emily jumped up to her, hugged her, and exclaimed, "Barbara, you are so kind, so good. I wish I had a mom like you. I'd always listen to you and do everything. Why don't you two get married? They make such a handsome couple." Ethan squinted slyly at Peter. Gregory and Ashley looked at each other, and he said timidly, "I'd love to. Only where's Ashley? Where's me? Just a regular orderly from the asylum." To which the girl came up to him and straight into his eyes quietly said, "You try it. Isn't that the main thing? Will you agree to be my wife?" Gregory asked just as quietly, taking her hand. "Of course I love you, and the most important thing for me is that you will always be close to me," Ashley answered and pressed herself against his chest, smiling. A month later, in a small cozy cafe, quietly, in a family way, celebrated the marriage. And the loudest of all shouted "MY. Wow, I now have the best mom in the world." The young people smiled happily and kept their eyes on each other. At that moment, Ashley felt completely happy for the first time in a long time. Although she had already noticed that there were at least 2 other happy people besides them. Ethan Peter was holding Barbara's hand and whispering something to her while smiling. At that moment, they looked as much in love as their children. The former billionaire froze in place when he saw a pram by the forest gate, and looking inside ... MP4. Kyle, a 35-year-old millionaire, packed his belongings at the mansion into a huge rucksack. He meticulously checked against the list of things he needed in the woods, which had been compiled by a hunter he knew. His movements around the house were watched in horror by his almost wife Amanda. "Kyle, calm down. You have a nervous breakdown. Have you heard of it? If all millionaires went into the woods after being dumped by their partner, the woods would have long been populated by entrepreneurs instead of trees. All the forest dwellers would hang themselves in a couple of months from such a neighborhood," she said. "Is it okay that the partner is my own twin brother? Is it okay that I trusted him more than I trusted myself?" Kyle asked. "No." "You, Amanda, what are you worried about right now? That you're going to be without a wallet in my face, or what? So I've put $1 million in your account. That's enough for you." Amanda flashed her eyes furiously. "You're a great guy, of course, creating your own business and all that. But why the hell are you insulting me? What the hell is your $1 million? I've been supporting myself since I was 18. I'm grateful for your support and gifts, but not the flat or the car you gave me. I didn't ask for it. I'm a modest girl. I know how to live within my means. And by today's standards, I make a decent living at my ad agency. Fuck you, Kyle. Go wherever you want to go, you fucking idiot. I don't care if it's in the woods or out of the woods." The girl literally jumped off the couch and grabbed a brand-name purse and began to dress. Angry tears of resentment streamed down her face. Kyle finally came to his senses, sat down on the couch and wrapped his arms around his head. "Amanda, I'm so sorry. Come to me," he said. Amanda wiped her tears, took off her shoes, and sat down next to her lover. Kyle often called the girl in the ancient manner Lada my Lada, and it pleased both her and him. There was some sort of ancestral protection and magic coming from those words. "I didn't mean to offend you, it just carries me. I need to be alone for a couple of months," Kyle pronounced. "At least if I stay in town, I'll get boozy. Turkey and the Maldives aren't the best places for me to think about myself and the rightness of my being either. You realize I'm going to Maine to be a forest ranger. I do have a whole forest and technical school under my belt before university, after all," Kyle said. "I haven't forgotten. What are you going to do in forestry?" "Catch poachers and tame forest animals," Amanda asked. "Why tame animals?" They're more comfortable in the wild. Kyle smiled sadly and stroked Amanda's hair. And as for poachers, well, it depends. I've already called the forestry department. I helped the head of the forestry department with money once. I asked him for 2 or 3 months as an assistant forester. Incognito, of course, no one will know anything. That in fact I am a flower king who owns almost all the flower shops in our town. And what will I do without you? And what about the wedding? I thought we were planning on applying in a month. Amanda cried again. Amanda, but I'll be available to you. You can always call me. And about the wedding, well, we'll apply 2 months later. You'll wait for me, right? Think of it as me going on army training. You take care of the flowers and our cats. Kyle was a real cat person and had 3 cats of different breeds. Yeah, Amanda sighed, wiped away her tears, and added, go to your animals. What's there to do with you? Of course I'll wait for you from your poaching duties. Where can I go? She got up and started helping Kyle pack. An hour later, the rucksack and bags were full. Kyle hailed a taxi to the airport, gave the duplicate of his house keys to Amanda, kissed the girl, and headed off to face the reflection of years gone by. Twins Kyle and Nicholas were born on 7th June 1988. Born, by the way, under the zodiacal protection of the sign of Gemini, their parents were military doctors who had undergone a baptism of fire in Afghanistan. In those years, the hospital where Natalie Brown and Winston Brown worked was located behind a high stone fence. There was a public garden in the center and an Afghan-American friendship house. There was a mess hall where they fed hot meals. Once a soldier fell from a gymnastic apparatus, having received a fracture of the sternum, a bruise of the heart, a hematoma, and another was beaten up by his grandfather for what they considered bad behavior. Natalie, can you imagine? These bastards hit him right in the heart area. Winston showed the pictures to his wife, indignantly. He worked as a surgeon. Look at the change in the entire left ventricle. You'd only be discharged after something like that. I know, Winston, they also, you know what else they do? The nurses told me. They walk up to a patient, they walk up to a sleeping patient, and they hit the heart area. It stops. Then they hit it again. Started it or didn't start it. So they find a dead soldier in the morning. The cause of death is your patient's sudden cardiac arrest, Natalie said. One of the straggling old men first raced to the canteen for compote. The one ran away 4 times, and on the 5th he refused. He started beating him viciously. Vanessa, the nurse, heard him moaning and sobbing and saved him. Look, in the Second World War, they would have just nailed the brute. But now, unfortunately, it's not World War II. In this case, her husband answered her sadly, we will save the day. But everything is God's will, and we are not gods. Winston, come on, you're a professional. Everything will work out. What's with the pessimism? What if it's professional burnout? Then we should go home. But it's quieter. There's nothing wrong with professional burnout, Winston replied. A year after the Browns, Natalie and Winston returned home. They had twin sons. The country was already in the midst of a change of power, with all the consequences that entailed. Those who had seized power were broadcasting to the whole country that it was necessary to deepen and accelerate the processes and to engage in dialogue. And the newspapers suddenly, like ants in an anthill, were suddenly shouting that we have atrocities and the police are ruthless. The country was stagnant and the issue of special rations had to be resolved radically. Natalie's labor went well. The boys were born weighing 3 kilograms and 200 grams each and were 54 centimeters tall. Food prices were still reasonable. A 3-liter can of juice cost $1. Meat was $3 a kilo. Fish was about 70 cents a kilo. With Winston's salary of $250 and a part-time job, it was possible to live. Except Natalie wasn't very good with milk. And at that time, it was quite problematic with milk formula. So she had to go to a dairy kitchen. And soon Winston managed to find a supplier of formula for his sons. And the issue was resolved. And on 7th December, when the boys were only 6 months old, there was a terrible tragedy in Arizona. And doctors were needed there, of course. And military medics first and foremost. Arizona was hit by a catastrophic earthquake that killed at least 25,000 people. At 11:40:01 a.m. local time, a series of tremors in just half a minute nearly destroyed and caused severe damage to the cities of Prescott, Sedona, Flagstaff and Lake Havasu City. 21 towns fell into oblivion. One town was left stone dead. The first plane from Washington with military field surgeons, which included Winston Brown, and medicines in the evening of 7th December flew to Arizona to Flagstaff. The next day, a team of 8 highly qualified physicians and military field surgeons headed by American Secretary of Health Travis Peterson arrived to help them. Already in the first 24 hours, military doctors provided first aid to more than 1,000 people. Have you heard? They say that during this earthquake in the zone of rupture of the Earth's crust was released energy equivalent to the explosion of 10 atomic bombs. And each one of them for a second was the same as Hiroshima, said one of the officers, sitting down for evening tea. Pour cognac in your tea, Winston said tiredly. Yes, heard something here. The head doctor of one hospital lost his whole family and all the colleagues who worked with him. He was the only one who survived. Can you imagine the condition he's in? We should help take him to Washington, the interlocutor continued, but he refuses. He says he won't stay here with his family, medical major Marcus Morris answered him. In addition to Winston, the field hospital had 5 other surgeons, 2 anesthetists, and an infectious disease specialist. Unlike the situation in Afghanistan, where the war was going on, the casualties were evenly admitted to the surgical table, but at least 60 people a day had to be operated on. Winston Brown, like his colleagues, was simply falling off his feet from fatigue. Comrades, the chief physician told them at an internal meeting, the wounded will now be brought in from everywhere. The mobile medical teams, which included students from the Washington Medical Institute, have been activated to help. The guys will be traveling through the surrounding villages, where everything is destroyed, and there is no help for people at all, and no one to provide it. So the students will search for them and transport them to us. Get ready, the workload will double. The operated and rescued people were sent to Florida, Miami, and Washington. All of the patients at the hospital where Winston worked survived, every single one of them. But here is one incredible episode Winston Brown remembered for life. He had nightmares about it for a long time. It is, on the one hand, eerie, but on the other, incredibly inspiring. From time to time, a moment of silence was declared in the dead cities in order to hear the groans of people trapped under the rubble, but still alive. Such was the case on the night of 15th December. Suddenly, doctors and rescuers heard a quiet crying of a child, apparently a very young child. They flew up to the cavity and together they removed a concrete slab that had been split in 2. What they saw gave them a real shock. Next to the baby lay the dead mother. As it later became clear, the young woman was breastfeeding her son at the time of the earthquake. When the slab of the house in which they lived collapsed, the woman, by some superhuman effort, managed to hold it and make it so that between her and the slab there was a free niche into which the baby crawled. Judging from the bloody hands, she tried to save herself, but she lacked strength. The mother was unconscious, but from time to time pressed the child to herself and gave him breast. Thanks to this, the son survived. 3 months later, Winston returned home. The sons grew up and gained strength. And after 2 more years came the turbulent 90s, and life changed dramatically. Wages began to be delayed. Natalie invited her mother, Mrs. Cassandra, from the village. She really didn't want to go to the city, but she had to get the children back on their feet. And to do that, Natalie had to go to work. Grandma Cassandra, as Natalie and Winston jokingly called her, arrived with huge bags of pork, chicken, her own pickles, jams, lard, and many other tasty things. And frankly speaking, by city standards, frankly scarce. And several huge bottles of moonshine, which Mrs. Cassandra had also brought with her, were real currency. They could be exchanged for a lot of things: good shampoo, nappies for the boys, or coupons for something equally scarce. "Mum, how did you get all this stuff in here?" Natalie asked in horror as she took the bags away. "Why didn't you tell us we were coming? Winston would have met us in his car." "Yes, in a beautiful white car with a cross and a blinker," Winston said, smiling. "He got a job on the ambulance on weekends. You couldn't take a part-time job like that on weekdays. A surgeon has to get enough sleep at night. Otherwise, how can he operate? You'd get the wrong reaction from your hands." "Am I a fool to carry it myself? I hired some men at the railway station, gave them a bottle, and that was it. I gave them a piece of lard. They were happy, flapping their ears. That's it, daughter. Is your food supply bad at all? Like in the war, she asked. There was a knock at the door. Winston opened it, and two shabby-looking men with a huge sack appeared on the doorstep. Here are the women. We dragged your potatoes from here. They're heavy, the guests explained, wiping the sweat from their faces. Well done. Here's your fee. And Mrs. Cassandra handed the men a bag containing the same moonshine and lard and a jar of cucumbers. Thank you, feel free to call if you need anything. We live next door, in the basement, the man said with a toothless smile. My name's Ben. If anything, this is Scott. He nodded toward his partner. Where do you guys live? In the basement, Winston and Natalie interjected at the same time. Well, yes. It's warm in the winter and cool in the summer. We got the rats and mice out, cleaned up down there. Sabrina from our office manager's office let us set up a workshop there. By the way, we can help with the plumbing. And what in the house to attach, nail, brace something or someone? Scott laughed childishly, switching to you with his hosts. Fine. Just don't need to hit anyone. And that's how we'll handle it. Thanks, men. Winston shook hands with the foreman. And satisfied, they retired to their versatile basement. Winston's family began to sort through Grandma Cassandra's supplies and gifts. The boys, meanwhile, saw an open jar of jam, and it came to an end rather quickly. Oh my God, look at them, Grandma splayed her hands and laughed. Get into the bath now. Forward march, she commanded, and led the grandchildren to wash off the currants and sweets. Gradually, things were getting better. It was necessary to live in spite of circumstances, the policy of the state and the cruel reality of existence. The hospital didn't pay for 3 months. So what was the point of Natalie going back there? So she and her neighbor Marion decided to try their hand at shuttling to fly to Turkey and buy clothes there and sell them in their own town, opening a shop. Natasha, it's a very risky endeavor. Haven't you heard that bandits stop shuttles on their way back and simply rob them? And that's the least of it. You know what they do to beautiful women. I'm not letting you in, Winston said. Comrade Medical Captain, I'm senior to you in rank, so you understand. And you and I pulled wounded men out from under fire in Afghanistan together. So don't be afraid. I still remember hand to hand. But seriously, Marion has made arrangements with reliable people. We'll pay them right away, Natalie said. Her flatmate Thomas was from the same office that employed these very same gangsters to the detriment of humanity. Thomas? Really, Winston wondered. He's a former athlete. Such promise. And parents, I remember him. What a quirk of fate. Exactly, an athlete. And where do they go after the collapse of the country? Either to the police or not to the police. It's who has more dark or light forces in his soul. Though in essence that in cops, that in bandits, they with rare exception in our law enforcement agencies work not at all defenders of people, but with accuracy to the contrary. You yourself have been on ambulance calls when sober people were stitched up after a visit. But with what will you buy the goods? I've got a bit put aside, and my mum helped. Anyway, we took out a loan against the security of her village house. And they didn't tell me anything. You and your mum. No offense, Winston. I knew how you'd react to something like that from me. You wouldn't approve. I'm sure it will work out. Natalie stroked her husband's head. A week later, she and Marion and 2 other women flew to Istanbul. There they bought a batch of t-shirts and tracksuits in bright colors, extremely popular in the turbulent 90s. Got back safe and sound with the help of Thomas, Marion's boyfriend. Opened a stall in the market and sold everything for a good profit. Paid off the loan. We had enough left over to live comfortably for a month. But then we had to go again, because Winston was being paid very little and prices were rising fast. This time we chose Canada. We got to the border by train. At the crossing, almost at the border, we were getting ready for bed, but suddenly there was shouting, swearing, and some noise coming from the corridor. Natalie, what's that noise? There didn't seem to be anyone particularly drunk in the carriage. Did there? Marion asked her friend fearfully. I don't know. I'll see, replied Nathalie, who possessed a truly officer-like poise. 5 minutes later, the door of the compartment in which they were traveling opened. On the doorstep stood 2 sturdy young men with rich muscles and unencumbered faces. Their heads clearly had only one winding in them, and that was the one that flowed smoothly into the rectum. "Good night, you shuttles," one of them said with a cheeky grin. "We're not from around here ourselves. Help us out any way you can. We're collecting 100 quid each. For our boss's birthday party, will you help?" The women were silent. Then another man, also in good athletic shape, appeared behind the big men. He had a short haircut and was clearly in a bad mood. "What are you guys doing here? Don't want to pay? We'll explain the risks." "I don't want to, don't need to," Captain Natalie replied calmly. "We're human beings, understandably, not the ones in the compartment." Silence hung. Marion and the brothers stared at Natalie in surprise. A second later, a man came into the compartment and turned pale. "Natalie? Natalie Brown? But how? What are you doing here?" That's somehow. That's how you go. So get out of here and run," he ordered. The row rose and ran on, and they disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. "Sit down," Captain Natalie invited, pulling from her bag a brandy, 3 shots, and an unpretentious snack. "Well, here's to the meeting." She picked up a shot glass and drank the contents in a gulp. "What's wrong?" "Dr. Smith, how did you get to be foreman?" "And you're the foreman?" "I've got that right, haven't I?" "That's right," her overnight guest answered her with a volley of brandy. "It's a long story, and I'm running out of time at the moment, as you realize. But in a nutshell, I was blamed for the death of a patient immediately after returning to the civilian life after Afghanistan, and sent to think about my behavior for 5 years in places with bad weather, fogs, and not very nice people. And then you understand, what the hell surgery. Although I did get out on parole after 3 years. Okay, Natalie, let's not talk about the sad stuff. No one's going to charge you anything. I'm sorry about what happened. I've got to go," and he disappeared down the corridor. Having collected the tribute, the captain's crew snapped the stopcock and disappeared into the local woods. Marion looked dumbfounded at Natalie, tears streaming down her face. Then quietly she asked, "Did you fight together? Had surgery?" "Well, we fought a little," Natalie replied. "Okay, let's go to sleep." They were never touched again on this trip. They brought back the goods and sold them very successfully. It was possible to develop further, but after the meeting with Alex, which she did not tell Winston about so as not to upset him, Natalie decided that the shuttle business had to end. The money she earned was enough to open a private kindergarten. While in a rented 2-room flat, she obtained all the necessary permits, hired 2 female employees. The hospital where Winston worked was slowly coming into its own. Slowly but surely it recovered from the side effect of the change of power. 3 years later, Natalie was able to buy a small building for her first kindergarten or nursery. In another 5 years, she had a whole network, and Natalie began to receive small bonuses from the government tax cuts and the opportunity to participate in presidential grants. She won one of them and received $100,000. It was possible to develop further. Nicholas and Kyle grew up very different in character, with almost 100% external similarities. Nicholas was a bright boy, but not a very honest boy. He could get into trouble and take it out on Kyle. He never took any offense. "You're 3 minutes younger than me. What can I take from you?" he smiled. They both did well in school. They were always messing with the teachers' heads, as is common among twins. They could disguise themselves and pretend to be each other on tests and even exams. The first serious fight was over a girl. In the 11th grade, Kyle fell in love with the first school beauty, Catherine. She reciprocated him because the brothers had a bright appearance, article, and charisma. Dark-haired brunette with big brown eyes and correct facial features. Modern children grow up early, as well as enter into adult relationships. And in Kyle's case, it happened, as they say, one day. The girl's parents had gone to the dacha, and the guys drank a little more wine than they needed. True, it turned out that Catherine's Kyle is not the first. But that one has already turned 18, so to make claims he did not become. It's not like anyone's ever been with anyone else, Kyle thought, but he shared what had happened with his brother. Firstly, he trusted him, and secondly, this was Kyle's first sexual experience. Nicholas, smiling indulgently, listened to his brother's story and drew far-reaching conclusions. The following Saturday, Catherine's parents went to their garden again. Kyle had been invited to have a sleepover by 9 p.m., but the doorbell rang earlier, at 8. "Oh, what's so early?" "I haven't cooked the chicken yet. Just threw it in the oven," Catherine wondered as she opened the door and let the young man in. "Missed you very much." "I couldn't resist. I came early and the chicken will wait." He smiled and pulled the girl to him and said, "Shall we look in your room?" "Yes, let's look," and kissing the guy and putting her arms around his neck, Catherine replied. They moved to the bed. The young man started kissing his girlfriend feverishly, pulled off her transparent dressing gown and quickly undressed himself. Suddenly he noticed Catherine's frozen stare. She pulled his hands away abruptly. "Got your dressing gown on. Why, baby?" he asked. "No reason, Carlson. Pack your stuff and fly to your roof. And keep in mind, I'm telling Kyle everything, you prick jumping off the bed," Catherine barked. "What are you, out of your mind?" "Kyle who?" "It's me," marveled the young man. "Exactly. Brown you are." "All right, you're taken," Nicholas smirked, putting on jeans and socks, which was exactly what he was. "And how did you guess that?" he grinned. "It's our. None of your business, you stingy little thing. Though I will say Kyle doesn't have a mole on his right rib." "Fucking hell." "That's right," Nicholas yelled. "All right, whatever. It's worth a try, isn't it? Gorgeous. Bye, baby." "Get out." Nicholas sprinted out the door, and Catherine could still hear him laughing for a long time as he went down the stairs. An hour and a half later, Kyle came in with flowers and immediately realized something was wrong with Catherine. "Are you in trouble? What's wrong? Did I do something to offend you?" He crouched down in front of the girl, hugging her knees. "It's okay," she replied and suddenly cried unexpectedly, burying her nose into Kyle's. And then she laid out everything that had happened, even though she hadn't meant to initially. That was just her way of scaring Nicholas. In fact, Catherine realized that by telling this ugly story, she would simply quarrel the brothers. In the end, they would forgive each other anyway, and she might lose Kyle's favor. And after all, his parents might find out sooner or later, too. She was only half right. Kyle was really mad at his brother. They'd even fought in the street after they'd gone a decent distance from the house. But it didn't affect the way he felt about Catherine. And they didn't tell their parents anything. For a month, there was a cold war between the brothers. But then Nicholas first came up, apologized, said that he just wanted to joke and was not going to bring it to an end. A lie, of course, but Kyle believed it. He loved his brother. Blood wasn't water. Catherine's family soon left America for Canada. Her father was a Canadian, and life in his native country in any case more comfortable than in a region where there is little sun and fruit. After graduating from high school, the Brown brothers served in the Army together. Winston made sure they got into one unit in one state in Washington. After the Army, Kyle unexpectedly for his parents and for himself, as originally planned, instead of the institute, went to the forestry technical school, and Nicholas on the law school. After the technical school, Kyle went to university to study economics and graduated with honors. Despite his law degree, Kyle was unable to start his own business. Yes, by and large, it was not a necessity in life. Natalie's business was still thriving. Her chain of daycare centers was in good standing. Alex was still operating. There was nowhere to teach. Thanks to the efforts of Mr. Johnson and his girlfriend Sabrina, the military doctor training system had been destroyed at the root. Where once there had been New York and Boston, now only New York was left. The Colorado Military Medical Institute, along with one of the best military hospitals in the country, was destroyed. And what's the use that Sabrina was given 5 years of general security? High-security prisons in America do not give ladies. And Johnson got off with a ministerial suspension. It's a good thing the country's military hospitals haven't been wiped out. Military medical science has been completely destroyed. There are no clear management, military medical structures, and personnel have been lost. To recover, we will need at least 10 years, and that is, if it will be applied to this effort. Winston was horrified. The military hospital in Portland has been standing like a ghost for 13 years. Natalie, 13. I'm simply speechless. If they had put a career officer in Johnson's place and made him do what this so-called minister did, his heart would have burst. And Johnson? He's all right. Living and breathing and eating pineapples and grouse, I suppose. And we're in desperate need of military doctors. "Winston, what can you do now?" Natalie gently stroked her raging husband's head and reassured him. When Kyle graduated from university, he decided to open a flower shop, but not in the usual format. His parents had given him the money for the startup, and Kyle had lived up to their expectations. Here they prepared not only flower arrangements, but also toys, vegetables, fruit and sweets, and sometimes from unexpected materials. For example, once a client ordered to create a bouquet of nails, hammer and nuts. This was her idea to congratulate her husband, who worked at a construction site. And Kyle's company pulled it off. By the way, it was this, so to speak, flower arrangement became the best advertising campaign for his company. They made it and won the attention of the city, and then the country. Even journalists from New York came to make a report about the unusual flower salon. Kyle began to expand, and in 2 years he built his own network of such salons, calling them Talent. This was the name of the Slavic goddess of skill and talent. Nicholas worked as a lawyer in one of the offices of the city, but to be honest, he wasn't doing very well. And Kyle just needed a good lawyer in the company, because his specialist Bridget got married and went to another city. Of course, inviting his own brother to work with him in this situation was ideal. Nicholas was glad. He was tired of sitting on minimum wage and constantly asking his mother or brother for money. Kyle had given him a more than decent salary and access to all his accounts and documents. For a year they worked together, as they say, as friends. Nicholas did his best to be useful to his brother and justify his trust, but Nicholas got caught. He fell in love for the first time in his life, so much so that he lost his mind. He forgot about his conscience and his responsibility to his brother's cause. That day, as always, he was driving to work, as suddenly a girl literally threw herself under his wheels. He braked sharply and jumped out of the auto. On the road, rubbing a bruised knee, sat an absolutely heavenly creature about 25 years old, Nicholas said. Blonde hair with a touch of silver, chiseled facial features, porcelain-colored skin, and some incredible violet-colored eyes, and charming lips of perfect classic shape without the slightest hint of silicone. It was obvious that the owner of all this had never had the services of a plastic surgeon, and her beauty was natural. "What's wrong with you?" "Are you hurt?" Nicholas asked. "Why are you crossing the road so carelessly and in the wrong place?" "I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose. I'm not thinking straight," she replied, rising from the pavement and looking sadly at her torn tights. "So get in the car. I'll take you to the trauma center and I'll compensate you for the tights and stress," Nicholas invited, not yet realizing that he was already dead, drowned in those witches' eyes. "Oh no, I'll call a taxi," now timidly resisted the new acquaintance. And then, when she saw that her purse and coat were in the mud, she agreed, "I'm unlikely to get into a taxi like this. All right, let's go." "My name is Nicholas. What's yours?" "Sharon." How's Sharon?" Don't be surprised, it was a peculiar obsession of my mum, who was a fan of Sharon Stone back in the day. The girl smiled. And that smile made Nicholas's stomach flutter. Not even butterflies, but a whole flock of hummingbirds. "Does that name suit you?" Nicholas asked. "I know it does. We're almost there. Turn right over there and you'll see my 9-story building right away," she said. "If you have time, I invite you to come in." Nicholas couldn't even dream of being invited to visit and was very excited. They went up to the 3rd floor, entered the flat. Nicholas immediately noticed the towel-covered mirrors. "Excuse me, did someone die in your apartment?" he asked. "Husband. A blood clot broke off, that's all. Yesterday was 9 days. I didn't have time to take the towels off the mirrors. I'll put them away now so it won't be so oppressive," said Sharon. She quickly removed the cloths from the mirror in the corridor and in the great room. "Have a seat. I'll tidy up now and come in," the hostess said. Nicholas looked round the room. Everything seemed to be clean, tidy, excellent design, quality materials and furniture. But he had a strange feeling. He couldn't even explain to himself what was wrong. This understanding would come to him much later, when he had already made a mess of things. Nicholas pushed the unnecessary thoughts away from him and, sitting on the fancy sofa, relaxed. 15 minutes later, his new acquaintance appeared. She had changed into light trousers and a tunic But even in them, her stunning figure of a film diva of the 50s was visible, a very thin waist, inviting hips and high breasts with a long, like a ballerina neck. The hostess brought coffee and brandy. "Sharon, I'm driving. I'm not allowed," Nicholas refused. "And I remember you gave me a lift." "For me, I haven't come round from the funeral yet," she said. They got to talking. The girl asked Nicholas seemingly quite simple and meaningless questions. But in fact, in the answers to them, a careful man could draw a lot of useful information for himself. And he, being a very communicative person, and now being under hypnosis of incredible violet eyes, was talking as well as some famous TV presenter. She told almost nothing about herself, only that she had come to the city from a small village 5 years ago and immediately married a military man. When America began to confront Russia on the territory of Ukraine, her John left in the first ranks. He died recently. They did not have time to give birth to children, although they really wanted to. After the death of her husband, according to Sharon, she received a very decent compensation, so she was able to work for the time being, especially since it was difficult to find anything decent paying with her laborer's degree. They talked for about 2 hours in the morning, and it was only then that Nicholas realized that he had been lost at work for a long time. He apologized, asked his new acquaintance for her phone number, which of course she gave him, and rushed to the office. He hadn't been himself all day, which Kyle noticed right away. "Nicholas, what are you doing?" "I feel like you're in love," Kyle joked, not even realizing how close to the truth he was. "Why?" "You bet I am," and turning away, he blushed like a red-haired maiden. "What am I really? Have I fallen in love?" "Oh, for fuck's sake," he thought, and immediately started dialing Sharon's phone number. Hello, the receiver was picked up immediately, as if he'd been expecting the call. "Sharon. Hi, it's Nicholas. How are you?" "Thanks, Nicholas. I'm fine. Why are you being so formal?" No, unofficial Nicholas was once again, to his surprise, embarrassed for 3 minutes like his father's youngest son. "That's fine. Are you busy tonight?" he asked. "Did you want to take me out?" "Yes, it's Friday night," Nicholas replied. "Can we go to a restaurant? Sit down." "I know a very decent, quiet place," Nicholas suggested. "And you know I don't mind." "Come and pick me up at 8 p.m. Deal," Sharon replied. At exactly 8 p.m., Nicholas arrived in an expensive taxi. He rang the bell from the driveway and Sharon came out, or rather her copy from the film Basic Instinct, white tight-fitting dress above the knee and the same white jacket. Her hair was pulled back into a high updo. Holy shit, was all the taxi driver in his 50s, who remembered the cult film well. That's the girl. Nicholas was so smitten with the girl that he didn't even pull him back. He jumped out of the car and opened the door for Sharon. The one with the feline smile got into the auto. Surprisingly, there were no marks on the beauty's exposed knees from the morning fall to the pavement after the accident with Nicholas' auto. They went to the restaurant Nicholas had chosen. They had a great time there, but they had to get home. Nicholas did not dare to invite the girl to his house, despite the decent amount of drink, trying to gain courage and self-confidence. But to his surprise, Sharon decided everything for both of them. "Nicholas, you've been to my house and I haven't been to yours yet," she said, looking him squarely in the eye. "I really want to see your butterfly collection." "What butterflies? The ones in my stomach, or am I wrong?" "They're not there." "Really?" Nicholas replied gruffly. "Let's go." They didn't get enough of each other until near morning, falling asleep in each other's arms. Nicholas gently removed Sharon's slender arms from around his neck and, throwing on a dressing gown, went to the bathroom. 15 minutes later, strong coffee, ice cream, hot sandwiches, and freshly squeezed orange juice were ready. When he returned to the bedroom, the girl was no longer in bed, and the sound of water pouring could be heard from the bathroom. Soon she came out, wrapped only in one small towel, like Aphrodite. "How delicious," Sharon exclaimed, gorging herself on breakfast. "I tried," Nicholas replied proudly. From that moment on, they began dating. Nicholas was literally glowing with happiness. 6 months later, he proposed to Sharon. And despite the fact that after the death of her husband was not even a year, she agreed. They applied, and the day after they had to go buy Sharon a dress, Nicholas' suit, and book a restaurant. Nicholas hadn't said anything to Kyle or his parents yet. He wanted to tell them right after they went shopping and introduce them to his fiancée. They agreed to meet at Sharon's house in the morning. Nicholas came, rang the bell, but the door was opened by an unfamiliar woman of about 45. It was obvious that there were other people in the room. There were bags and suitcases on the threshold. "Good morning. Who are you here to see?" the woman asked. "Excuse me, I'm here to see Sharon. And you're her mom." "Sharon? Mom. What are you, young man? Have you been eating a lot of bleach?" "No, there's never been a Sharon here. This is our flat. We're back from America, where we've been living for the last 2 years. And the door slammed shut in Nicholas' face. 3 minutes later, number unknown flashed on his mobile phone. Nicholas Brown picked up the phone. "Hello, fiance," came the mocking voice on the other end of the line. "It's Sharon's dad, Bruce Willis, talking to you. We have your girl. In fact, she's always been ours. But a year ago, she decided to run away, and now she's getting married. No, we don't mind the prospect. But your girl costs a lot of money. You bring us 300,000 euros, you can have her. Consider it a bride price." And the speaker laughed nastily. "Wait a minute. Which daddy? Who's we? What bride price? I'm going to the police now," Nicholas protested. "I'm a lawyer myself, and I wouldn't advise that." "Lawyer, green-eyed leaf? You go to the cops, then Sharon will stay with us forever. We'll find her another fiancé who's more agreeable and wealthy. An MP or something. Come on, don't be bored. In 3 days, we'll contact you and tell you where to bring the money." The connection was broken. Nicholas sat on a bench outside Sharon's house and then made a decision. He went up to the 3rd floor again and rang the doorbell once more. This time he was opened by a man the same age as the woman who had met Nicholas earlier. "Good afternoon. Please let me in and listen to me," he said. "Oliver." "Who is it?" a woman's voice rang out. "Oh my God, it's you again. I'm going to call the police now." "You don't need the police. Let me in to talk. I have to." "Well, come in," the man invited. "I just have one question. Do you know this girl?" And Nicholas held out his smartphone to them. In the frame, Sharon was smiling. "Oh my God, that's Sherry, my niece," the woman splashed her hands. "What, do you two know each other? When was the last time you saw her?" Come in, come in. What's your name?" "Nicholas." "We were getting married. Did you know her old husband?" "Who?" "She didn't have a husband. But she had a lot of terrible things. Sit down, Nicholas." His hosts invited him into the kitchen. Oliver took out a bottle of good vodka, and Monica, for that was his wife's name, sliced sausages. Lard took out a jar of homemade pickles. "Sherry, or Sharon, is my own sister's daughter," she began to tell me. "I've told you before, my older sister Veronica has always had a strange side. She's been seeing some shadows, counting some constellations, and having unusual and often prophetic dreams since she was a little girl. So it is quite understandable that at the age of 20 she got into a very unseemly community, and the common people called a gang. As luck would have it, her leader, or whoever he was, turned out to be a very handsome young man, and she fell head over heels in love. In fact, it was a real organized crime ring. But the leader, Terrence, he was the Star-Spangled Banner. That was his nickname. He was into astrology and otherworldly stuff too. That's how he and my Veronica got together. He told her that his supporters, and in fact his accomplices, rob only scoundrels and bribe takers. It's almost like Robin Hood. And she, if she wants to, of course she can help them. Veronica was very pretty. Sharon was just like her, Monica continued, smoking a cigarette and brushing away a tear. Yes, she was beautiful. But you listen, she suddenly switched to you. This Terrence guy talked her into becoming a decoy. He'd find rich, unmarried men through his channels, and he had them in management companies and the police. Then he'd set up a seemingly casual encounter. For example, a girl would accidentally run out onto a carriageway where there was no traffic light. The driver braked sharply, picked up the unfortunate, and walked her home. And then it was like love and all that. After that, the bride would suddenly say that she needed a large sum of money to pay off the huge debt she had incurred from loans or something else. A man who was in love, and Veronica knew how to fall in love, believe me, withdrew a large sum of money from her account. Veronica would get the money and disappear. Monica took another drink. "What, shall we continue?" Nicholas asked, setting the glass down. "We also met Sherry. Only she didn't ask me for any money herself and didn't say anything about debts." "Well, that's not surprising. Look, she realized the prick was using her when she realized she was having a baby. She told Terrence, and he said she should get an abortion cause she didn't want kids. And that it was time she knew the truth, so he told her the truth. Veronica came to see me in shock. We lived in the country then. I told her not to even think about terminating the pregnancy. She barely carried Sharon to term. She was in labor and died in childbirth, just like that. Sherry was raised by me and my husband Oliver. God didn't give us any children of our own. Nobody touched us. Father Terrence never showed up again. When Sharon turned 18, she decided to move to the city. She went to theater school and graduated with honors. She'd already been called to the Young People's Theater. But then her father showed up out of nowhere. I don't know how he found her, but he did. And everything started all over again, Monica said. Only now Sharon was using men for money. So she was just using me too? He called me, as I realize now. Sherry's father, Terrence, this one of yours I don't know. Nicholas told it like it is. They parted ways. But 3 days later, no one called Nicholas. It didn't happen a month later, or 2 months later he almost went mad, drinking, trying to find his Sharon. But almost a year later, he got a call on his mobile phone from an unknown number. Nicholas, it's Sharon. I've literally got 5 minutes. Listen to me carefully. Go to the village of Sunflowers. It is 100 kilometers from one of the forests of Arizona. Take at least $100,000 with you. You'll find a real witch there. She's the only one there. The locals are afraid of her, so don't cross her. If you don't believe me, that's your right. But I can't get out without your help, and I'm not the only one. Don't you dare call this number. I'm throwing away my phone and SIM card. I'm done. I love you. Nicholas sat up for a night thinking. Then he went to his brother's office, opened the safe and took out all the cash, about $2 million. He left a note. I'm sorry. I'll explain everything to you. But later. He quickly packed his rucksack, bought a ticket to the nearest station to the village of Podsalnuki and left the house. The situation was extremely tense in the district forestry office of the territorial department for one of the Arizona forestry districts. Senior Forester Walter for a long time conflicted with local residents who illegally cut down deadwood for firewood and at the same time still bribed his direct superiors, the chief forester. In addition, poachers were constantly poaching bears and wild boars for wealthy officials, even during prohibited times. According to the law, anyone could conclude a contract for firewood harvesting for their own needs with the territorial department of the Ministry of Forestry complex. And some people seem to have made contracts. Walter even found such documents from loggers caught in the act. Except that the firewood had been harvested not this month or even last month, but a quarter ago. The logging documents turned out to be old, which is already a violation and a reason for a criminal case. That is, the trees in the forest had just been cut, but they referred to the previous time. In this case, the inspector was obliged to first of all report the violation to his immediate superior, and the latter to the police, where in turn they should have issued a notice for proceedings. The subject article: illegal cutting, damage to forest plantations, or unauthorized cutting of trees and bushes in forests. But that didn't happen. Walter dragged the press into the forestry office. They created a scandal. The head of the department, with whom Kyle Brown had negotiated employment, was removed from his post. 3 other agency employees were reprimanded. Brown, I'm Walter. Where's Michael? I'm for him. He was removed from his position, and it's my fault. But he told me to take you to him when you got here. He's living alone in the woods now. I'll start our trusty Jeep, and we'll go. They drove along the forest roads for about an hour. Then Walter stopped, and the men got out in front of a solid wooden dwelling. A fire was burning, and meat was roasting on a spit. A bearded man in a gray jumper, a la Hemingway, came out of the house. "Kyle, it's so good to see you." "Come on in, darling. And you, Walter, come in too and don't be embarrassed. Don't blame yourself. You didn't know what was what, did you? You've been working for the good of our forest and fighting for justice. Come on, men, and you're welcome. Michael, it's been a long time, as they say." "All day too," the man smiled. They entered the house. The interior arrangement was simple but functional. It had everything they needed: 3 beds, a table, a refrigerator, and a tiny television. Next to the house, Kyle was surprised to find a mobile bathhouse. Electricity was supplied by a generator, and the dog Sultan guarded it. The dog looked like royalty, shaggy, powerful, with fluffy fur. There was also paraffin and ordinary candles in the house. On one of the beds sat an old man with a waist-length beard. He looked to be about 200 years old, at least. "A tent and a dugout are not suitable for settled life," he muttered. "It is better to build a reliable winter hut. Like ours. What if a blizzard or a wild beast comes and destroys everything? Temporary dwellings should be built carefully, not in a hurry. Starting from the first spring days, or better when the forest spirit Beer wakes up. And his family too." "Michael, give me a cigarette," demanded the strange old man, and Michael held out a cigarette to him. "Here you go, Grandpa Harry. It's a real factory cigarette, rolled long ago when the factory was still in operation," Michael said, smiling. And the strange character continued the story, either to himself or to those present. "It is not necessarily true that the best logs for felling are winter logs from damp trees. They're easier to handle, but harder to haul. That's what I wanted to tell you about. The prototype of a lumberjack and a philosopher in one person was broadcasting. And how to deal with it. All sorts of people can come to me now and then to argue. And not necessarily good people. Here's the thing. Hunters, fishermen, you name it. So what? Anybody. Just make sure they know who I am right away. Otherwise they'll think I'm some kind of runaway, wounded, hiding out in this clever way. Or that I'm out there catching salmon with nets and getting caviar. Or something like that. Beastly. What if they think I'm torturing someone or something? So you tell them straight away." The old man slapped his hand on the bed. "That so-and-so is from Michael, and I'm working with him." The old man put out his cigarette, suddenly lay back on the bed. Sultan sniffled. Walter and Kyle goggled, staring at their grandfather. After listening to his monologue, Michael, barely containing his laughter, asked Kyle. "Kyle Brown, the great American actor Charles would be envious of." "Who's that?" "That's my father," Walter replied. "He's lived in the woods all his life, knows all the secret trails, was friends with the wolves." "Well, sit down already at the table. I'll bring the meat now. I've got moonshine too. We'll discuss how we'll live on." They sat down and ate meat. The generator had to be switched off. They lit a paraffin lamp for the night. "Well, there's nothing I can do for you in terms of official employment," Michael said. "But Walter's got you on contract as a forest assistant. That is, as his assistant. That'll do, of course." Soon they were asleep. Through his sleep, Kyle could hear Sultan barking and the quiet conversation between his mentor and Walter. "What am I going to do with him?" "Michael, he's certainly a good guy as far as I can see, but he won't be with us long. He's got a whole other destiny, and he doesn't need to stay here. Let him help you fight the poachers, and then we'll see. Let's go to bed." And they put out the paraffin lamp. Nicholas reached the nearest station without any adventures, but when he got off the train he saw not just the absence of a modern railway station, but some semblance of it. Near the wooden building sat children and old ladies with pies and smoked fish. Nicholas approached them and asked, "Beautiful girls, how can I find a real witch doctor?" And handed each of them a $100 note. The girls were stunned. "So she lives at the end of the village." "Our Charles will take you there now," they replied, counting the money. Charles turned out to be a not-yet-old man of rather shabby appearance driving an old Jigalenka. "It's important," he said, "and $500 on top. Plus a bottle of moonshine, which Nicholas sold immediately to the old ladies. He paid and got into the wreck. They drove for 2 hours over bumps. They stopped at a well-worn fence. Nicholas got out, knocked on the gate. It was opened by a woman who was not an old woman at all. "You've come. So you've done well," she said. "The cards have not lied. Come in, then." Nicholas entered the courtyard and was speechless. He saw a large log house. Somewhere inside there was a child's crying and a painfully familiar female voice. "Come on, my kittens, now. Now I'll feed you, my darlings." Nicholas pushed the woman aside and literally flew into the house. There was no one on the ground floor. He ran up the wooden stairs to the first floor. One of the rooms was open. He entered and saw his Sharon breastfeeding one of the girls. He could tell by the pink nappies and caps. The second girl, bandaged with tiny feet, lay in a cot. Sharon turned round. "Well, our daddy's here, thank God," and set about feeding her second daughter. "Well, that's it, parents, come on, I've opened up your room and made your bed over there. Do you need to talk? And me, little ones, I'm off on my own. You fed your daughters, didn't you, Sharon?" "Sure, just a little bit, and then to bed. Elizabeth's the only one who's restless. Elizabeth, what did you name your other daughter?" Nicholas looked at his daughters' tiny faces and everything turned over inside him. "Alice and Elizabeth. Except I haven't written them down for you yet, but I'll tell you later." "It's a good thing you haven't. It's up to the father to sign his daughters in." They talked all night. Sharon said that when her father found her, she was very happy, for she didn't remember her mother at all. When Veronica got away from him, the pregnant Sharon and his whole gang were taken. And everyone in the gang got a decent sentence. My father got the longest 20 years of strict regime. He served his full sentence, and in the meantime he'd made even more criminal connections. "How did he find you stroking Sharon's hair?" Nicholas asked. "Jesus, Nicholas, what's social media for? I posted about myself on social media, Telegram, Facebook and Instagram like all modern girls." Terrence went out, made inquiries. It wasn't difficult. He texted me first, sent me a photo of him and his mum young and happy. Then they met. And then we met and he asked for help. Sherry continued. He said he'd been robbed by some official in his day. He was dead, but his son was left with an inheritance. But the money supposedly belonged to the father. And I, as the heiress, just had to invite that man to visit him in a rented flat. Their accomplice would be waiting for him there. And I'd get the money for my education and to start a business. Sharon, darling, but that's utter nonsense. How could you believe such nonsense? And wait, did you sleep with him? Nicholas got out of bed and, pushing the girl aside, lit a cigarette through the open window. "Nicholas, can you hear me all right? I told you I just got hit by the wheels of his car, invited him to visit, that's all." "What was the trick with me?" Nicholas asked coldly. The youngest by 3 minutes of his father's son did not turn to the girl. An eternity had passed for him in these few 24 hours, when he had robbed his own brother, found his one love, and gained 2 daughters at once. "Nicholas, you won't believe this, but I got under the wheels of your car completely by accident. I was waiting for Monica when she went to the US for 2 years. She left me the key to her flat. I lived there. I came in, and there was my father. All the pictures of Aunt Monica and Uncle Oliver are gone. He puts up some portrait with a black mourning stripe on it, covers up the mirrors and says to me, 'Sherry, daughter, help me one last time.' I goggle at all this and ask, 'Why and what are you doing?' There's this fat carp named Kyle Brown. He's got a chain of businesses around town, and his dad's a thief too." "What? My dad's a thief?" "Yeah, our dad and mom fought in Afghanistan too. They're military doctors. What kind of thief is he, Nicholas?" "Calm down. For God's sake," Sherry said. "Oh, listen to me." I didn't agree, Sharon continued. I started screaming that I would no longer be involved in his affairs. I got hysterical and ran out of Aunt Monica's house and got hit by your tires. And then what happened? That was the day we met. I specifically invited you to visit. I thought if Dad showed up and I wasn't alone, he'd slow down. And he did. Yeah, they had some kind of fight. Dad got hurt in the fight. Then when we were out shopping, I came out of the house just to take out the rubbish. They picked me up under my arms and shoved me into the car and drove me to Daddy's mansion. He bluntly told me that either I would shake you out of your money or he would do it himself. I said no. And then you know the rest. Wait, but why didn't anyone call me back after 3 days as promised? I would have found the money because I started having uterine bleeding. My father had nowhere else to go. He called an ambulance, and that's where it turned out I was pregnant. He paid for my stay in an expensive clinic. I don't know why. What plans did he have for me? Why were there plans? Don't you have any now? The stroke broke him. He had a mistress working at the clinic where I was lying. Sherry's a sweet girl. She loves her father to bits. I don't know why. They've been together about 10 years. And that's our grandmother, Natalie's daughter. Sherry. It's like a soap opera. It's like a bad film, for God's sake. Maybe. But she's the one who quietly brought me here with the girls at night by herself. After she gave birth, she was very afraid her father would leave her because of us. He's the best man in the world to her. That's how it is. Where's the father now? Well, in the hospital, I guess. Where are we going? I don't understand. We can't live in the woods forever. I know, go to bed. Just a question, why did you say to take so much money with you? I was asked to, Nicholas. I didn't know how the situation would turn out. And if he started blackmailing you with the kids, what then? Amanda asked. She hadn't been able to get Kyle on the phone for a week now, but today was her lucky day. Hello, Amanda. What's wrong? Came the sleepy voice of her lover. What's wrong? You promised to always be in touch, and you're acting like an irresponsible person yourself, and she burst into tears. Quickly tell me where your forestry is, before I get all the press in town and the cops on the case. I'm pregnant, Brown. And if you think it's an immaculate conception, I'm going to greatly disappoint you in that delusion. You're pregnant. How's that? Wait, Amanda. Kyle was now starting to wake up to the powerful snoring of Walter's grandfather, right, he said. And he dictated to her the details of where their hut was located. You need to get to the woodshed first, and then they'll assign you a guide. Stop. What am I talking about? Don't fly anywhere, but there were already short beeps on the other end of the phone. Damn. I'm irresponsible, Kyle exclaimed. About 5 minutes after the call, Amanda's mobile rang again. Nicholas's number came up. It's the catcher and the beast. Nicholas, we're so happy to see you. Are you on holiday in the Maldives or what? Brother's stolen money run out. Amanda, the money is safe and sound. I'll explain it to you later. I need to know where Kyle and Alex are right away. Nicholas briefly told his story to Alex. He woke up and hastily washed his face and suddenly heard an infant crying. What the hell, he thought. Have I gone crazy on the fatherhood thing or something? He turned around and saw that right next to the door of the ranger's cabin was a pram for the twins. Only it was pink. He walked over to it in shock and found a note that read, Hi, Uncle Kyle. Your nieces Ellis and Anna are writing to you. Please welcome the new addition to the family. What's the joke? Kyle asked. At that time, Nicholas and Sharon appeared from the house. Meet. This is my future wife and the mother of my daughters. That is, your nieces. What's going on at this time? Grandpa Walter woke up and came out of the house rubbing his beard. There you go. I told you all sorts of people would come, Grandpa Walter remarked. I've never seen anything like this with children. Are we going to have children living in the gatehouse or what? Well, business. No, Grandfather. We won't have any children living here. They'll all be gone soon, Oliver answered him. And you go, we'll make herbal tea for everyone. While the brothers were talking, they were recovering from their experiences and what they had heard from each other. 4 hours passed. A police car appeared on the forest path and Amanda jumped out. The first thing she did was walk over to the sleeping babies, and then to Kyle and Nicholas. The boys packed up their things, stowed the pram and settled into the 2 civvies, one Walters, the other from the forestry. They made it to the station without adventure, and into town too. Amanda and Kyle went to his mansion, and Nicholas and Sharon went to his flat. But as soon as they entered the house, they saw a tall, gray-haired man sitting on the couch. Hello, daughter. The man stood up, a pistol in his hands. Leave your grandchild to your future husband. I don't touch the children, but will you come with me? I need money. Quiet, quiet, Father Terence. We'll sort this out with you now. You won't kill your own granddaughters, will you? Nicholas asked with fear for the children. The man, quickly assessing the situation, answered him. I won't. If you do what I tell you, I'll give you $2 million right now. They're in that bag. Take it. Are you a fool, son-in-law? What dollars? I need €1 million to get out of here. You don't have that kind of money, but your brother does. Bring €1 million to the airport in 24 hours. If you bring your friends with you, like in Ocean's 11, you'll end up with a crippled wife. I'm not going to kill Sherry. She's blood. But I'll cripple her, and I've got my daughter with me, so you'll think better of it. He grabbed Sherry by the scruff of the neck and dragged her towards the exit. I'm breastfeeding. What are you doing, you fiend? What kind of father are you to me? Are you a monster? Sherry screamed. Nothing, Terence replied. Feeding babies today is no problem. Your Nicholas can handle it, and you shut up, daughter. Because I've become very nervous since my stroke. I could make an ugly hole in your lovely leg or your equally lovely hand. That's gonna hurt. That's one thing. And secondly, it's not aesthetically pleasing. He dragged Sherry out the door. She could be heard crying and screaming. Then the car engine roared and everything went quiet. Nicholas sat on the sofa next to the pram, shaking. He couldn't rush out to rescue Sherry, leaving the babies behind. After calming down, he dialed his brother's number and told him everything. Half an hour later, his father and mother appeared on his doorstep, then Kyle, and with them a respectable man in civilian clothes. Clearly an officer by the looks of him, and not an easy one. Natalie and Winston went straight to the bedroom where the granddaughters were sleeping sweetly. They sat down next to the pram and looked tenderly at the tiny girls, holding each other's hands. At this time, the officer was instructing Nicholas on the proper course of action. Nicholas, you will be led. Do not fear for Sherry. We've been tracking Stargazer's movements for the last 6 months. The operation to develop the gang has been going on for even longer. But how did he get out of his hospital bed? Didn't he have a stroke or a heart attack? Nicholas asked. He didn't have a stroke. He was covered for by Jennifer Small, Terrence Morgan's mistress. That's the real last name of the recidivist thief and con man of all America nicknamed Stargazer. What do I have to do? We will provide you with the necessary amount of money. You will take a taxi alone, but with a bug. We don't know where he'll stop the taxi or what's in his head. SWAT has already been dispatched to the airport area. We've got machine guns in the woods. Tomorrow morning you're on your way out. At that time, Natalie came out of the bedroom. Winston was carrying his granddaughters in his arms. She walked over to her son. Nicholas, son, everything will be fine. Trust us. Your father and I have been through worse, and as you can see, we're still alive, Natalie said. And we raised you. Hold on, we'll take the children with us. Save your love. Yes, Mum, Nicholas replied. Terence dragged his daughter to the dugout he had dug in case of just such a force majeure. Sherry sat with her hands and feet bound, milk running down her t-shirt. It was time for her to feed her daughters. Stargazer hummed, walked over to her daughter and untied one arm, tossing her towels. It's clean. Took it for myself, he said. Give me some water and come back, Sherry asked. The man nodded toward a young woman who was sitting on the crates with her arms around her shoulders. Jennifer, give her some water and help her, will you? And don't shake like a sheep's tail. We'll be walking in another country soon, a normal country. First to Canada, and there we'll see. The girl took water, wiped the trickles of milk from Sherry's breasts. She let her drink. She was tired and fell back against the earthen wall. The mobile phone rang. Stargazer, give me the address. Nicholas, you're coming. What a clever girl. You'll be on the motorway now. Stop at the Cafe Myth. Let go of the car. You sit down at the table, order something. Someone will come to you. Jennifer, get ready. It's time for you to go. Yes, Terence, she suddenly dropped to her knees. Terence, we don't need that €1 million. Let your daughter go, please God. We won't get out of these woods, they'll kill us. I can feel it. We're not going to Canada. You're a grown man. Do you really think Nicholas didn't involve the police? He wouldn't risk the woman he loves, the mother of his children. He's definitely gone to the feds for help. I have about $30,000 in savings. I sold my mom's house in the country 6 months ago. Let's go. I'll take it out. I grew up here, Terrence. I don't need $1 million. You say 30,000 will get out, Terrence grinned. You're a village idiot. He won't risk his woman. I'll go ahead, come with me. If you love me, of course. And he grinned nastily. Jennifer stood up and walked towards the cafe. Nicholas was already sitting there, trying to feign nonchalance on his face, but he wasn't doing a very good job. Jennifer sat down at his table and said, "Quiet, follow me. I will lead you to the dugout where your wife is. I'm guessing you're not alone. That's the truth. Just nod your head and signal to the policeman." Nicholas nodded. Then he smoothed his hair, but Jennifer's words were already heard by the task force. They walked towards the woods, pretending they were just going for a walk. Terrence watched from behind the trees in the dugout as Jennifer and Nicholas got quite close. SWAT team members began to appear from behind trees and piles like ninjas. Bastard. Gave up after all, he yelled and shot the girl. He hit her in the heart with the first shot. Jennifer died instantly. Several more shots rang out in response to that shot. After sending Terrence to the dust, the prisoner was taken out of the dugout. An ambulance was on its way. The girl was placed on a stretcher. Nicholas sat beside her. A year later, everything went back to normal. The end of autumn promised snow. The New Year's rush and holidays approached. Sherry and Nicholas's girls were just starting to walk. Amanda and Kyle had just recently become parents too. They had a son, so the older Browns had 3 grandchildren at once. At first, Amanda and Kyle resented the fact that the twins, the Brown family heirs, went to the 3 minutes younger brother. But then they got quiet. Their Charles was giving them so much fun at night that when the boy was multiplied by 2, the parents might not have been able to stand it. December came. The family was preparing for New Year's Eve. Nicholas decorated the Christmas tree, stacked presents under the tree. They sat with Sherry on the floor and drank hot mulled wine. "Still, why did you call yourself Sharon and dress like Sharon Stone on your first date?" Nicholas said. "Honestly, it doesn't suit you at all. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's not you." "I don't know," Sherry replied. "Aunt Monica used to tell me a lot about how I got a bit older and already realized that Mum was gone. That Mum was beautiful, like Sharon Stone," Sherry said. "So I made up a stage name for myself. I'm a theater major, after all. Promise me that all theater in our married life is over, okay? And now we'll have only real, very real life," Nicholas answered. "Promise?" "I promise. But then you promise me too that you'll live for 300 years and never leave me." "I promise." At the same time, in the distant Arizona woods, Elizabeth's grandfather was making herbal tea for Walter and his Thomas, as always, and traditionally muttering into his gray beard. A dugout is good when it's warm, but in winter a bear can get into it, or some other fierce beast. As it happens, even an inspector may come to offend a good beast, like Charles of the Woods or Sabrina the Fox. "Let me have a smoke. I can't control your demonic visions, but pour me a drink. The new year is here. I can smell it." "No, grandfather, the chimes haven't struck yet." "Wait a bit," replied Walter. "What do I need your chimes for?" "The wolves have begun to howl, and the owls hooting. Here they are congratulating you and me. The forest beast knows exactly when the new year is coming. Well, let's go, men." The bell rang at the most businesslike time, 10 a.m. At this hour, she still liked the movie Arrhythmia, the one about the emergency room doctor. But before that, she couldn't understand the main character's girlfriend. The girl returns when the house is buzzing with drunken company. She is invited to join them. She deflects with words, say, "Not now, guys, I'm tired." She goes into the next room, closes the door behind her, turns on the music and falls asleep. How can she fall asleep in such a mess, and to a song? When Miranda became an EMT, she understood. Now she could pass out on the bus, or in a concert hall, or at home, even if the ceiling above her was on fire. Especially after a night like tonight. Of course, it's not an ambulance, but it's not much easier. There are times when the duty is more or less calm, but now the labor was a mess. In addition, the older one, with twins, also decided to give birth now. 2 weeks ahead of schedule, by the way. It's a good thing everything went without complications. We didn't have to call for help from surgery. But Miranda went home, as they say, down the wall. When she returned, her husband had already gone to work, leaving behind unwashed dishes and a hungry cat. Miranda caught herself using medical terms in her normal life, too. The gray puddle's pitiful and demanding cries had been controlled with the help of a couple of Purina packets. Then Miranda sat on the stool, unable to decide whether she wanted to eat or sleep. The last thing she wanted to do was move and get up. Finally, she cut off a thicker piece of sausage, drank the sandwich with milk straight from the bottle, and wandered to the bedroom, taking off her clothes as she went. What indescribable bliss it was to collapse into a clean, soft bed, to burrow into the pillows. Sometimes it seemed to Miranda that somewhere down there, deep down, if you climbed into it, there was a childhood left. You could dive into your own bed and come out in one where you were 10 years old and had so much strength that you could fly. But she wasn't flying now. The crow horse kicked her in the stomach with its hoof, but it didn't hurt, only frightened her. Probably if she had been dreaming a good and peaceful dream, the phone call would not have woken her up. But the black horse, multiplied by the mechanical trills coming from the corridor. 100 times Miranda wanted to give up the landline. She wished she and William only had cell phones that could be set to do not disturb. But the apartment belonged to her mother-in-law, and Peggy Urton's principle of life was let it be this applied to everything, from old buttons, which her mother-in-law carefully kept in a wooden box, and to the non-working television set, which had been moved to the pantry. What if it was still useful? The phone went silent, then rang again. Miranda got up as slowly as if she hadn't woken up on the move, but had been revived and was still part zombie. In the hallway, she leaned against a coat rack. Candy Adamson? A voice asked, sounding like it belonged to a very young girl. If the girl pretended to be a special investigator, she could hang up right away. But no, Miranda felt a vengeful feeling. She even wanted the girl to say, "Scammers are trying to make a loan in your name, and you have to help us." Then you can remember the turbulent years of youth, and tax the wench not even 7 stories, but that the size of a skyscraper. The resentment at fate for waking her up was so great that Miranda longed to let the wench's ear melt from her profanity. "It's the assistant notary," the girl said. "You need to come to our place on the Embarcadero to read the will. You have an inheritance. Will you accept it or refuse it? Can you come today? We're open till 6. No, Miranda didn't know why she'd said that. Let's do it tomorrow. Later, she couldn't explain to herself why she had decided to take this pause. And who? Who left me an inheritance? She asked. Can you tell me the name? And what inheritance are we talking about? It's a house. You've been bequeathed a house. Come and have it explained to you. Then the girl got distracted. Someone started to question her. She started to answer the person she was talking to, and a couple of moments later she hung up. Miranda was left at a complete loss. She went back to the bedroom and climbed into bed again. But sleep didn't come to her now. A house. She would have been surprised if someone had left her even a small amount of money. There was no such person. And suddenly a whole house. It would be possible if she had been a social worker, taking care of some lonely old woman. But who gives such gifts to midwives? Miranda tried to think, but something like a premonition stopped her. Don't, it was an inner voice, otherwise you might remember something very, very unpleasant. It was too late. Miranda put her palm to her mouth. She saw that face right in front of her again, those eyes, a rich emerald color like no living person's ever had. Not unless contact lenses. Again that caressing, ingratiating voice whispered, "And I'll make you a present. You'll get it when the time comes. Then you won't turn away, you won't go away." Has the hour come? Perhaps her family was once an ordinary young family with a husband and wife who love each other and their little daughter. They are almost children themselves, and they sincerely consider her to be the 8th wonder of the world. Only Miranda didn't remember those wonderful times, even if she was dipping her memory deep, deep into the place where all outlines are blurred and reality is so easy, and simple to coexist with a fairy tale. For example, she once caught a star. The 5-beam neon blue star was lying in the palm of her hand and glowing. "It's bad for star on Earth," said Mom. "Let's let her go to the sky." And as soon as Miranda unclenched her fingers, the star, easily like an air bubble or a balloon, began to rise. Miranda still believed it had really happened. Her mother only laughed when she mentioned it. Another time Miranda was flying. She and Daddy were walking through town. There was a blizzard, very strong winds, and real snow swirls. And she was about 3 years old. Daddy held her hand, but the wind picked her up and carried her. It was a tiny distance, just 2 or 3 steps, but a real flight. These are the only 2 memories of a happy family. But it's so easy to say, even to yourself, if you're sober nonsense, it never happened, it couldn't have happened. And what was real, on the one hand, my father somewhere far away in a distant northern city. On the other, Mom and stepdad. My father never came, only called 3 or 4 times a year. And he sent gifts. A reindeer hat, pine nuts for Miranda, and money for what her daughter needed by postal order in her mother's name. And Mom and stepdad had careers. Later, when Miranda watched Western movies with an adult eye, she thought they would fit in perfectly in this life where careers ruled the roost. No, stepfather never hurt his stepdaughter, and Mom was quite attentive whether she needed to take Miranda to the children's clinic or celebrate her birthday. Mom never forgot not only the important, but even the little things, and did everything flawlessly. My mom worked as a lawyer, and her memory was phenomenal. She memorized all her clients, even their phone numbers by heart, and if you woke her up at night, she could recite the pages of a case like poetry. If she undertook to defend someone, almost with 100% probability this person could celebrate victory in advance. The stepfather was in the construction business. Miranda took it literally. Her stepfather was tied up in the construction business, but he was in love with his bonds, business trips, clients, new projects. He could only talk about these things at home. And my mother about court hearings, about the defense arguments, about sarcastic prosecutors and their triumphs, more like a victory in a fight. And so often one would say to the other stepmother's stepfather, or vice versa, "I'm proud of you." This pride was evident. During the time my mother lived in her second marriage, they changed several apartments, each time moving to a more spacious one and closer to the historical center. The brands of cars changed. The resorts to which my mother and stepfather went on vacation became more and more prestigious and expensive. And on the other side was Miranda and her life. For a while, a long time ago, Mom had wanted them to be friends. And then it just sort of went straight to another dimension. It's good that you're growing up on your own. Soon you'll be living on your own, and then. Miranda used to go camping. She was 12 years old when she joined the Young Hikers Club. The leader of the hikers was the same, the restless Margot, with a stick up her ass, as her stepfather used to say. And so it began. Every weekend, a hike in the surrounding mountains, even in winter. They returned in the early twilight, drunk with frost, hungry, because there was never enough tea in the thermos and pies, and did not hurry to scatter home, but sat in the club exchanging impressions, telling stories, making plans. And Miranda came home the way her stepfather probably came home to the hotel on business trips just to spend the night. And during the vacations. Then we'd take a train to some glorious city, and Margot would swear because the guys would play The City Goes to Sleep and The Mob Wakes Up all night long, and the girls would lock themselves in the bathroom and spend half an hour there to put on makeup with sense, with purpose, with care. And really, you can't walk around San Francisco without makeup. It's like going barefoot in the street. Or we rafted down the river in kayaks, went on the Zhigulevskaya around the world trip, or on a horseback ride. If Miranda had been asked about her plans in those years, she would have said she would never settle down, never put down roots somewhere in one place like those closest to her did. She wants a house on the water, some sort of very simple yacht. And after the small journeys, the big journeys are sure to follow. When now you can go to Ireland, to the Emerald Isle. You can live in a haunted castle, dance in the street on St. Patrick's Day, and then pull up the anchors and sail to the opposite end of the earth, somewhere in New Zealand, to another Emerald Island, so that the whole world can be hugged like that pillow before going to sleep, and enjoy its beauty when reality is more beautiful than any dream. Soon, very soon, she will be on her own feet, and then goodbye to the cold house and the ambitious dreams of its inhabitants. She has enough of herself and a backpack on her back. Her family are sober people, and know that their desires have limits. And what Miranda wanted was always over the top. And she did not try to seize what she admired, to appropriate it for herself. It was enough for her that she saw it, that it existed under the sun. All these amazing cities, castles, waterfalls, depths. And then everything changed and ended. In one day, or rather one evening. The very night the circus came to town. No, she wasn't going to go to the show. Miranda avoided taking money from her mother unless she could do without it. When she started earning her own money, that would be different. It was just a spring evening on her way back from the club. She was on her way through the park, and there was a colorful tent, and the wagons were close together, one to another. Everyone around was enjoying the warmth, almost the first of the year. Already they wanted to throw off their coats and jackets. Already they could see the coming summer ahead. There was a queue at the iron fence at the entrance, where they were checking tickets. Miranda had never seen so many children all winter, both very young, in strollers and a little older, and almost all of them were holding white and cotton candy clouds. Miranda was drawn to the carriages. They were so different in this celebration of life, tired, with peeling paint, with wheels that had measured thousands of kilometers. They smelled of sweat, old age, and cheap powder. Miranda stroked one of them with the palm of her hand, a motion of compassion. "Come here," she suddenly heard a voice say. It wasn't someone real calling out to her, a voice sounded in her head. Please, it didn't say, but Miranda realized that this someone was asking for her. She almost whispered back, but how, and immediately realized what she had to do. Just get on all fours, or even crawl, and crawl into that circle. But in the carriages, live circus performers and their animals. And of course she'd be chased out of here right away. At best they'll call her a fool, because there are predators here. At worst, they'll think she was trying to steal something. But she couldn't refuse the voice. And so, moving like a caterpillar, pushing with her legs and knees, she crawled the few meters. Now the voice sounded as if the unknown man were speaking directly into her ear. "Let me out." She jerked, tried to look around, and immediately banged her head painfully against the metal bottom of the wagon. No one was near her, but someone was calling out to her. At the same time, Miranda saw that there was no one on the small platform that the cars surrounded on all sides. Then she decided to climb out. That cage was right above her. Above where she had just crawled. There was no other way to call it a cage because it was a frequent grating, and inside it sat a man. A boy about the same age as her. He was looking at her, but his lips did not move, and she heard it clearly again. "Let me out. Open the latch. No one should be in a cage, no living thing. My mother told me that once, when Miranda was a little girl and they took her to the sea. Every time she passed a fisherman, she tried to save a single fish. Stealthily snatch it from the bucket and release it into the sea. But now she wasn't at all sure she could handle the lock. Just pull the latch to the side. It sticks sometimes. Pull it hard, one pull." That impatient voice ... Did it actually sound, or did she hear it in her head? Miranda pulled the latch with both hands, writhing with effort. Then she stood on her tiptoes and pushed against it with her skinny body. And that's when the latch finally slid sideways, smooth as butter. The boy was already standing near the door, and when he heard the click, he opened it with lightning speed. And faster than Miranda realized what was happening, he slid under the wagon and was gone. "Who are you? What's your name?" "I'll find you, Miranda," she said. And before she could answer, the last words came out. She needed to get out of here as fast as the former prisoner had disappeared. But at the same moment, she saw an older man. More like an old man, a tall, thin man in a blue shirt and jeans. He was carrying 2 buckets, probably on his way to feed the animals. When he saw the open cage, he did not set it down, but dropped his burden and raised his palms. "I only got here now ... I'm late ... Didn't manage to stop you ... Girl. What did you do? What's that boy in there for?" "He's being punished, isn't he?" Miranda asked, trying to establish some kind of rapport with the old man. But the man only shook his head. "Maybe it's a good thing you did it, but what happens now? Get out of here if you can." Miranda didn't have time to take his advice. A woman entered the small area, surrounded by carriages and hidden from view. She was about 35 years old, and there was so much inner strength in her that even her step was dancing. Her dark hair hung to her shoulders, and she was very pretty, but that wasn't what impressed Miranda. The woman was eating a rose. Yes, she was holding a red rose on a long stem and devouring it voluptuously like ice cream. The old man seemed to hold his breath the moment the woman saw the open door and the empty cage. She raised her thin eyebrows in surprise and turned around to the old man. It said without words that she was waiting for an explanation. The old man waved his hands. "I only came now. I saw for myself what you saw." It was too late to run. And Miranda braced herself for the reprimand she was about to receive. The boy probably deserved a severe punishment, and she'd set him free. The woman handed the old man the tattered flower and walked toward Miranda. The closer she came, the more uncomfortable she felt. When the stranger leaned over her so that Miranda could feel her breath on her, she was seized with an irrational terror. The woman held her by the shoulder, and her fingers were strong, as if made of metal. "You stole from us, sweetheart." It took Miranda gathering all her courage to answer. "But if that boy lives with you, he'll come back. He'll go for a walk and then he'll come back." "He's not coming back." A smile appeared on the woman's lips, and Miranda felt as if she were about to share the rose's fate. The stranger bent down, and there's no way out. Bright green eyes, that glowing hue that no living person could ever have, stared straight at her. "For what you have done, you will get a present." The woman's voice became ingratiating, cooing, like a predator enjoying her prey. "Oh, not now. But the hour will come, and you will surely get it. You won't be able to refuse my gift, and then nothing will save you. Get out." Her fingers loosened on Miranda's shoulder, but the pain remained. The girl felt that her right arm was barely obeying her, just a whip. The old man hurriedly, nudging her in the back, led her out of the courtyard and onto the wicket, behind which the people with tickets were crowding. Stepping back a few steps, Miranda turned around. The old man was still looking at her, shaking his head. The expression on his face was as if he were saying goodbye to someone who was hopelessly ill. "Maybe I shouldn't go." Miranda asked her husband for the umpteenth time. "It's probably a divorce ... who would bequeath the house to me. Neither my dad nor my mom would do that. And besides, we're talking about a will, and they're still alive. Thank God ... She hoped William would listen to her. He liked to amuse himself by talking to crooks. When he received another warning that someone had gained access to his bank deposit, he would make himself comfortable on the sofa and say, feigning alarm, that he had millions in his account, and of course he was very worried about them. Therefore, of course, he was ready to fulfill all the orders of the investigator. Then followed a half-hour conversation, during which William pretended to be an idiot who had to explain everything 20 times. And only when he had driven the crooks to a frenzy did he laugh obscenely loud, send them to the mother lode, and call it a day. But now her husband was unaccustomedly serious. "Let's go there and find out," he suggested. "There really is a notary at that address, and has been for years," he said. "If it's a stupid joke, they'll explain it to us. We're not risking anything." What if? Well, what the hell? I had to agree to it heartily. And it was so fortunate that on the day Miranda had bargained for, they were both free. The young woman had even mapped out an escape route for herself. If the inheritance turns out to be a hoax, they will go to a small bistro nearby as a sign of moral compensation. The ice cream cocktails, they were very good. And it's been so long since they've been out together with William. In fact, Miranda was prepared to have the notary's office point them out the door as soon as she said her last name. "That's the first we've heard. There's no inheritance for you. And no one called you." But they were politely invited to wait in the reception area. They had to wait in line for an hour. Miranda was getting more and more nervous, occasionally taking her husband's hand and squeezing it tightly. Then she let go and looked at William with a guilty smile. He nodded reassuringly, saying, "Wait, it'll all work out." Finally, their turn came, and now the notary, a blooming woman in her 50s, pulls out papers from a file and reads out in her usual rapid-fire voice that the will makes Candy Adamson the owner of the house located at. William's face reflected complete amazement. It was a dream to live in a place like this. An ancient boulevard that stretched through the center of the city and ended at the foot of the mountains. They had never hoped to live in one of these mansions. It was simply impossible. Probably we're talking about some backwoods chicken shed after all. Miranda, on the other hand, had other things to worry about. How she interjected. Could you please tell me the name of the woman who left me all this?" "Tiffany Gilbert," the notary read in syllables. "I knew her. She came to me many times. Her grandson was a troublemaker, a drunk. But the grandmother herself was wonderful. Almost to the last day she was running around the stores by herself with those Nordic Poles. She survived the blockade, by the way." Things got very confusing. To the notary, too. The woman pushed her glasses up on her nose and shifted her eyes from Miranda to William and back again. "So you're saying you didn't know her at all?" "What about that son of hers?" William asked. "In order to change the conversation, he won't sue us? After all, he probably hoped to inherit from his mother." "The son, as far as I know, died before she did. It's not uncommon for alcoholics to have parents who get over them. Maybe that's what got Tiffany Gilbert down." "And how did the grandmother blockade survivor get such a house?" "As far as I know, such old ladies have time to save up for their funerals and only." "Her husband was a famous man." The notary's voice became drier, as if William's over-suspiciousness was unpleasant to her. "So ... sign here ... now here." It didn't seem to occur to the notary that such an inheritance could be refused. William, too, waited impatiently for Miranda to sign here, and wherever there was a check mark. So the young woman went outside as a homeowner. Miranda and William looked at each other. They both had the same thought to go to see. "Hold on, I'll call my mom," William said, and pulled out his phone. Miranda didn't want to see Peggy Urton again, but she understood her husband. Mom had been with him all her life, and Miranda had only been with him for 3 years. So he wanted to share his joy with someone he'd become diffusely attached to. Miranda mentally groaned her scientific terms again. She couldn't think or speak otherwise. Peggy Urton was apparently so shocked that she took the unprecedented step of calling a cab. Normally, she would have considered this a hobby and calculated how much of her pension would be eaten up by such a millionaire's game. But when they reached the house, Peggy Urton was already there. They recognized the mansion from a distance because a familiar figure was walking along the sidewalk and wringing her hands in delight. She believed in this miracle that had fallen on their heads. Maybe because she'd been waiting for miracles all her life, dreamed of winning the lottery or find the treasure, waiting for God to say to her, as in the commercials, "You deserve it." "Did you bring the key?" was the first thing Peggy Urton asked, forgetting to say hello. William spread his hands. "We just wanted to see." It was a house of old brick, of some dull purple color. It had arched windows, a mezzanine, a balcony with a wrought iron lattice, and a front lawn, like the neighboring mansions. "How could you not even know about the key?" Peggy Urton reprimanded. "We have to figure out the scope of work." Miranda looked at her in bewilderment and noted that it was probably the first time her mother-in-law had ever treated her as an equal. Miranda had been in disgrace before, and often when they met, her mother-in-law spoke only to her son, and it was as if her daughter-in-law were not even there. There was an official reason, of course. "She takes other people's children, but she can't have her own," her mother-in-law had once said, and Miranda had heard it. But in her heart, Miranda thought she just didn't like her mother-in-law. There are times when a person arouses antipathy, and no matter how much you smash him to pieces. Now Peggy Urton was excitedly explaining to her specifically. "I can already see that the windows here need to be changed. We can measure them today and order plastic ones. I know a company that gives senior citizens a discount." "How can you ruin such an antique?" Miranda wondered. Then a neighbor called out to them. Peggy Urton hurried to her, asking for the key, and it turned out that there was a key, and the neighbor was about to bring it out. Miranda hesitated, delaying until the last minute, the moment when there would be no way out and she would have to enter the house. On the other side, an elderly neighbor was mowing his lawn and occasionally glanced curiously at the new tenants. Miranda took a few steps in his direction. "Did you buy a house or something?" the neighbor asked. It was an inheritance, Miranda said, her tone apologetic to Miranda's surprise. Not only did the old man not congratulate her, he did not say anything friendly, as one might expect. On the contrary, he nodded his head as if in sympathy. "Are you going to turn it in?" he asked, as if still hoping for something. No, Miranda glanced around. The door was open, so her husband and mother-in-law were already checking out the new property. "I guess we'll be moving here ourselves." The old man lost interest in her and went back to his lawnmower. "Why did you ask?" Miranda asked before she left. He shrugged. Because it's not going to end well. Nobody lives here for long. You don't like it? Miranda asked cautiously. The old man shrugged. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to ask. Today the tenants are still here, and they don't seem to be going anywhere, and tomorrow they're gone. No one's been here more than a year. Excuse me, but the landlady? Miranda suddenly remembered she's owned this house for years. So she didn't live here. She was a renter. I only ever saw her when she came to meet the new tenants and show them around. What would scare them away? It didn't sound like a direct question, but like Miranda was thinking out loud. The old man was silent for a moment, then pointed a bony finger toward the house. I've been living here myself for 50 years, so I can't say that others don't like it. But I've worked it out. If the shutter's close, you're waiting for new tenants. What do you mean? Miranda asked in confusion. The landlady would come, close the shutters, and then bring the people who wanted to rent the house. Nope, the old tenants were still here. You know, people aren't used to shutters, it doesn't even occur to them to close them at night. Why is it that one evening the shutters are suddenly closed? And nobody opens them in the morning? A day or two goes by and the landlady brings someone new. She unlocks the windows and doors and shows the house in all its glory. If you're going to live here, you might be able to clear up this mystery. Miranda saw her husband walking toward her from the house, and that he was happy as can be, smiling ear to ear. Don't you want to look at it? He asked before he could approach. Go take a look. You'll like it. I doubt it, Miranda muttered quietly. The men shook hands, and William spoke again. Miranda realized at once that he was stinking with joy. She called it verbal incontinence. His husband talked about everything at once, straying from topic to topic. He asked if the rent was high and what was the land tax. He always mentioned that he was glad to meet the neighbors, and of course shared his plans for what he wanted to build here. A garage and a bathhouse first and foremost. The old man listened aloofly, and eventually the animation in William's voice began to fade. Come on, her husband took Miranda's hand. You'll see how nice it is inside. You'll like it. She really liked it. The corridor is very wide and bright, and the windows look out onto the garden. And in winter you can put plants in tubs and look at the greenery all year round. Big rooms. And where there was a hall, as they call the most spacious room, would fit their entire current apartment. Peggy Urton's eyes lit up, and she talked so enthusiastically about the renovations as if the house belonged to her, as if Miranda was nobody. The young woman only noted this, but took no offense. She waited politely for her mother-in-law to shut up and felt sorry for the way things had turned out. William sensed something. Do you agree with everything Mom suggests? He asked. Is there anything you'd like to change? Peggy Urton stopped precisely at a run-up. She looked at Miranda, as if she were looking at an unfortunate obstacle that might interfere with her plans. But the young woman only shook her head. I don't really care. Do as you see fit. Vitya, when we take Mom, let's stop at a cafe and order a large cocktail. William liked to remember how they met. He thought it was very beautiful and romantic. Miranda had gone on vacation with her mother and stepfather. Not because she had succumbed to her mother's entreaties. It was just that the camping trip Margot had planned had fallen through. The head of the hiking club ended up in the hospital. She had to have her gallbladder removed as a matter of urgency. I've been going somewhere all my life, eating what's cooked in a cauldron. Some porridge with stew. How can I be healthy? Miranda was very upset then. All winter long she had dreamed of these 2 weeks on horseback and in her native mountains. The starry sky at night, the legends Margot was good at telling, the honeyed smell of flowers, the tea that smelled of smoke, and the camaraderie that was the strongest in the world. Her mother noticed Miranda walking around upset, her eyes wet, found out what was wrong, and solved the problem in one fell swoop. You're coming to Egypt with us, she said, and don't be naughty, please. It's a great hotel, and you'll find something to do without us if you're bored. The stepfather expressed neither joy nor displeasure, and the matter of the trip was settled. Miranda was going into her senior year of high school that summer. She hadn't vacationed with her mother in a long time, and now that she was looking at her with adult eyes, she wondered if her mother was partying her ass off. Usually reserved, energetic, decisive, a real businesswoman, now she behaved like a child, ready to agree to any adventure. Jump into the water from the rocks, please. A party on a yacht in the open sea, she is the first. To try some new exotic dish, give only a fork. And even at the disco, her mother danced as if she were 20 years younger than she really was. If that's what she considers real life, if that's what she is, how can she suppress it for a whole year? Miranda thought. So it's back home, mom's not real, keeping herself in line. How hard that must be. She herself remained as she had always been. She couldn't stand the heat very well, and it was hard to tempt her to go sightseeing or stroll the local streets. But the hotel was nice, and Miranda spent most of her time in its coolness. But she liked the sea very much. Miranda was not a good swimmer, and her greatest pleasure was just sitting in the water, wearing a mask, and looking at everything around her, at the magnificent underwater world. Mom noticed this and organized a scuba diving trip. With an instructor, of course, but the swarthy guy, who swam like a fish, paid more attention to his mother and stepfather than to Miranda. He decided to show them some underwater caves. The girl, however, found herself in the depths, at some point panicked, and she immediately became short of breath. Perhaps the worst thing is to panic. In the blue haze surrounding you from all sides, you can no longer understand where the top is, where the bottom is. You try to surface, you get desperate, because the surface is not approaching. Your movements become cramped, your throat spasms. It was good that William had been there at that moment and had picked up Miranda, who was hysterical, and surfaced with her. He had said many times afterward that he didn't know what would have happened without him. And Miranda could sense that he was proud of himself. Then they did not part for the rest of the vacation. Miranda's mother, who had not even noticed the incident, was pleased that her daughter had found herself a good boy. William introduced Miranda to his parents, but the girl immediately felt that Peggy Urton did not like her. Probably the latter thought that Miranda was too simple for her son. William was a tall, handsome boy, and here she was a tanned, ponytailed brat. But the young people spent almost all their time together, and no one could prevent them. And the memory of the underwater adventure, of saving the girl, remained the most vivid and dear for William. Now Miranda had the feeling that her husband was drowning, and now it was her turn to save the day. Jeremy had been told from childhood that he was a special child, but he hadn't noticed it for a long time. Reading other people's thoughts was as easy for him as noticing that it was raining or sunny outside. He answered questions before his parents had time to ask them, and it was useless to secretly think up a birthday present for him. And when he was a baby, he often embarrassed his mother on walks by telling her in his sonorous baby voice what people were thinking as they walked toward him. ... But he didn't want anything that time. Honestly, he was old enough, 10 years old, to control himself perfectly well. And by the way, he'd never really liked the circus. His classmates had dragged him to see the show. And he could have gotten away with it. He would have left the circus with the rest of them if he hadn't been so stupidly caught in the act. When the magician, who looked very tired and not at all fun at heart, asked someone from the audience to help him, Jeremy, to his misfortune, volunteered. He was blindfolded, forced to turn his back, and the magician went into the auditorium to hide a crystal egg from someone in the audience. Then the magician removed a thick black blindfold from Jeremy's eyes and waved his hand in the direction of the gathered people. They said, "Choose who has it." It was supposed to start a game of cold and hot, but Jeremy did not think for a minute. He said, pointing with his chin at a heavy-set man. And he advised, "You'd better switch at once. He will give you the egg, and you will give him the live rooster. After all, you still wanted to get it and say that the uncle had hatched it out of the egg, like a hen." The audience laughed, and the magician laughed. After the show, the circus performers, though whether they were circus performers, vampires, or evil sorcerers, was more like them, asked Jeremy how he'd done it, and what else he could do. He spoke honestly about his abilities, adding that he gets along well with them in ordinary life, and he is not going to perform in the circus. The most beautiful of the women ruffled his hair. "Think about it. If you ride with us, you'll be rich and famous. We can ask your parents to let you go." Jeremy even laughed, imagining how his dad and mom would react to such a suggestion. They'd worry if he was half an hour late at school or at a friend's birthday party. They'd let him go to who knows where, with who knows who. I don't know. Finally, Jeremy was released, and he ran out into the park, drenched in the last rays of the sun, which was about to disappear over the horizon. His friends were waiting for him, and everything seemed to be the same as usual, running home with the boys. A delicious dinner prepared by his mother's stew with potatoes and cakes for tea. but it was as if someone had put an ice flake down his neck, and it wouldn't melt. And the next morning, hurrying to school, he saw the very beauty from the circus. She stood slender, flexible, in black leather pants, standing near the corner of the house, and to all appearances, waiting for him. "Come here a minute," he heard him say. Only then, much later, did he realize that the woman had not uttered a word aloud. Had there been a witness to the scene, he would have said that the stranger had been silent. But her thoughts were so clear and strong that he went to them as to a call. Then he saw a van around the corner, and a moment later a black handkerchief fell across his face. ... Over the years, they've used different ways to keep him. They tied him by a rope, chained him, kept him in a cage. His attempts to escape were especially desperate and hopeless at first, when he knew his parents were searching for him and going mad with anxiety. From here, from afar, he couldn't read their thoughts, but he could feel how they felt, and it brought him to tears, to the point of wanting, like an animal caught in a trap, to chew off a limb and escape. But he did not compete with ordinary people. He realized that at once. His attempts were anticipated with a smile and thwarted. He was punished, but not cruelly. They could have done anything to him, for he was at their mercy. But they never hit him, never physically hurt him. More often than not, they just left him hungry, sometimes for days at a time. The traveling circus continued to travel the world, and it seemed to Jeremy that he was trapped in some ruthless mechanism, and it was impossible to get out of it, only to obey. Sometimes, very rarely, he was forced to take part in the performances, and he invariably surprised the audience to the point of exclaiming, "It can't be. It's a hell of a thing." But the main thing that was expected of him was to find others like himself. Those who could understand him when not a single word was spoken aloud, when only a mental conversation was going on. There were such people, even if only occasionally. Of course, none of them had a gift equal to the one Jeremy had. All of them turned out to be weaker than him. There were those who could see the future, but Jeremy had never met a strong clairvoyant. The people he'd pointed out had been introduced to the circus people, talked to them. And Jeremy subconsciously expected that sooner or later one of them would end up next to him in the cage. But it didn't happen. When he asked Ada, the very beauty who was in charge of them all, she only smiled. "You're the best. You're all we need. Even I can't stand to be around you." "Why do you need all these people?" he wondered. And then she spoke the very words he thought. "It's a fairy tale. It can't be real. Because of these people, we are practically immortal. Our lives don't end." And that girl who helped Jeremy eventually escape, they must have seen her as a tidbit too. Peggy Urton was learning the finer points of repair. God knows where she got her information. If she'd ever cared about the subject before, it was only in terms of envy of her friends. Peggy Urton was a homebody. Almost always something kept her from going out. In winter, ice on the streets, I'll slip and break my femoral neck, and you'll have to take care of me summer heat. I can only exist under air conditioning. Spring and fall had their own resonances. And the main means of communication with the world remained the telephone and a friend. And Peggy Urton's life remained bland and uninteresting compared to that of her friends. There were dacha feats, overcoming themselves, unimaginable harvests and industrial-scale harvesting. Sagas concerning grandchildren and granddaughters, their health, their pranks, words, gifts. And of course, His Majesty repair ideas and their realization, exciting search for materials, handy or handless sons and sons-in-law, and finally the triumphant completion of the process to begin tomorrow to change something, because there is no limit to perfection. Against this background, Peggy Urton had nothing to tell. No country house, only flowers on the balcony, no grandchildren, only a cat at the young, and it was better not to even talk about repairs, because her friends comparing with her own would have found Peggy Urton's place murdered. The only thing the elderly woman was saving for was her own funeral. After the sudden death of her husband from a heart attack, she went into debt, and now she did not want to repeat the same story about herself. But even here she was disappointed. Her son only laughed. "Mom, there's no one left on top of the earth. They're all buried somehow. Or do you want a crystal coffin and telephone service in the other world?" "I want you not to be ashamed," Peggy Urton began. "Would you, to be honest, care anymore?" Her friends, on the other hand, spoke with feigned sighs. "Oh, we're trying to save something too. But my granddaughter is studying in St. Petersburg. I'm helping her pay the rent. My grandson wants to change the car. My daughter needs a kitchen set. It appeared that Peggy Urton had set herself some small, secondary goal, and it was weighing her down. But now it's going to turn around. A luxurious house, a real estate. Fixing it up is not like fixing up a high-rise apartment. Peggy Urton withdrew her funeral stash, sold the shares left by her husband. But her friends, pining with envy, gave her a disturbing thought. Peggy Urton immediately summoned her son and had a long conversation with him. That same evening, William told Miranda with a nervous chuckle, "Mom wants you to sign over part of the house to her. She has invested a lot of money in renovations. So here she collected all the receipts and handed them to me for you to look at." They had never had a fight over anything material before money. Things ... William was ready to back down. But what he hadn't expected was for his wife to shine. "Do you think your mom would mind if I signed the whole house over to her? Would she accept a gift like that?" "Are you serious?" "This is as serious as it gets. I'm willing to sign a deed of gift with the same notary." Needless to say, Peggy Urton had a sleepless night when she learned of this. Plans swarmed in her head, and each one was better than the last. Then she saw a garden, a beautiful garden, in an equally beautiful old neighborhood of the city, not in the outskirts of the city, where her friends' cottages were. Then she dreamed of eventually getting rid of the modern cheap stuff and furnishing the old house exclusively with antiques. Then she imagined a housewarming party, and her friends, out of curiosity, of course, would come running and be amazed. That's when it would be their turn to bite their elbows. In the morning, Peggy Urton called her daughter-in-law, not her son, but for the first time. She spoke to her with unusual warmth. Miranda was to come, by all means, and see how she was organizing the house. "It will be your inheritance after my death anyway," said the mother-in-law. Miranda shrugged as if the room was suddenly cold. She had put off this moment until the last minute, but now she had to go. Her mother-in-law showed her the house with the air of a tour guide who had her own personal museum. "And this is where the living room will be. Look at it, it's so pretty. It might be a little dark in the summer because the windows overlook the garden. The lilac bushes will grow ... I want to hang a big crystal chandelier here. I don't care if they say it's last century. The house needs the last century. And I want a fireplace. Then we can make a real one, by the way. I know how to make a stove. I learned it from my grandmother when I was a kid. In the meantime, we'll put in an electric fireplace, but to have a very good imitation of a live fire." Miranda had been following Peggy Urton from room to room for the past half hour, and the polite smile on her face made her cheekbones ache. Her mother-in-law regretted that the dining room wasn't ready yet, so coffee would have to be had in the kitchen. "And it's cozier there," she added, "and it's 2 steps from here to the pastry shop, so I bought an amazing cake. You take a walk around, see if you have any requests. And I'll call you to the table in 10 minutes. Miranda was alone with the house. Her first impression was that the place was always in semi-darkness. Peggy Urton could talk all she wanted about the crystal chandeliers and the fireplace, but even on a sunny day, the rays wouldn't reach here. Most of the windows faced north, and the shutters, and the lilac bushes, and the mezzanine balcony ... In short, it was dark without artificial light. Miranda went out into the hallway to find where the kitchen was. Suddenly she was overtaken by that distinctive smell. The smell of the circus. The smell of horse sweat. The tart smell of predators. Fresh sawdust, butterscotch, and baked goods. There was no smell of risk or applause. Miranda tried to figure out where the smell was coming from. How could it be if the painters had recently left the house? She opened one door after another and then stopped at the threshold of a small closet. Here she saw scraps of playbills on the floor, a pile of brightly colored costumes, some strange black hat, a makeup table. Miranda appealed to her sanity. Was it conceivable for Peggy Urton to keep all this stuff, not throw it away? After all, from her point of view, it was junk. Miranda blinked. The closet was empty. It hadn't been renovated, but there was no beggar here, except for the shabby walls, the board floor, and a window in the ceiling so narrow a cat couldn't fit through. The odor was much fainter now. She put her palms to her nose, and sure enough, she had just used them to grasp the door handle. She had just used them to grasp the doorknob. The odor was still there, so she had to wash her hands immediately. The bathtub was quickly found. Barbara Taylor had already had her hands in it, the ornate tile, the modern sink, the lighted mirror. Miranda shook the water off her hands and looked down at herself, petrified. A skull was staring straight into her eyes, empty black eye sockets. Not a human skull, a dog skull, and the mirror didn't show the bathroom itself. Just the skull, just darkness. Miranda not only clamped her eyes shut, she covered her face with her hands. She was afraid the skull would speak to her, and the sounds would be like a voice or a bark. When she opened her eyes, she could still see the terrible vision fading away. It gave way to her own face, deathly pale with widened eyes. "Where did you disappear to?" My mother-in-law was standing on the doorstep. "The coffee's getting cold." "My God, it's as if you've seen a ghost." Come with me, I'll give you some drops." After escaping from confinement, Jeremy ended up in an orphanage. Not right away, of course. First he tried to find his parents, and for that he had to get from the other side of the country to his hometown. He had no experience of homelessness, and he had never had to worry about food or lodging before. So Jeremy had a hard time, but somewhere hitchhiking, perfecting himself in inventing pathetic stories that could touch the harsh truckers, he still reached his home. And he learned that his mother and father no longer lived there. The father died soon after the disappearance of his son, and where the mother could have gone the neighbors did not even guess. The woman didn't share her plans with them. Maybe she could no longer see the house, where everything reminded her of her family. And if so, she probably changed the city too. He could have kept looking, but it was winter, and Jeremy was so exhausted and depleted that he acted foolishly, without thinking of the consequences. He slept in the cellars, if he could get into them, and he scrounged whatever food he could get. For example, he would go into the bistro, and while the tables were still being cleared, he would snatch a piece of bread that had been forgotten, or a pie that had not been eaten. He wore himself to rags and eventually ended up in the police station, and from there, in an orphanage. Hungry and struggling to survive. Jeremy didn't notice that he had lost his gift, and if he had, he wouldn't have regretted it. After the way fate had treated him, he considered the gift a curse, and was glad to be rid of it. But it turned out that his ability to read other people's thoughts did not disappear, but as if hibernated in hard times. And as soon as the boy warmed up and ate a little, everything came back. But now Jeremy knew that he had to treat his gift as if it were a potent substance, use it only when it was absolutely necessary. And he had to hide his gift from others so that no one would even realize it. Jeremy was fortunate in that he'd come to the orphanage after he'd mourned his parents, and he was sure he'd never find his mother. Either his tears had dried up forever. Neither sentimentality nor self-pity was in him anymore, but he was always waiting for the next blow of fate, and was ready to respond to it at least with sharp, boyish fists. And it paid off. In the orphanage, he was not bullied, he was not mocked. On the contrary, he even earned some respect. Everyone knew that he had no relatives, that he had been vagabonding for a long time. Usually such kids are not interested in studying. Sometimes they can hardly even read. Jeremy pounced on the science, as if he knew he needed it, that he couldn't do without it. The boys tried to tease him, they trumped him with their ability to sass the teacher. But Jeremy cut off such taunts at once. He began with a florid phrase, almost entirely made up of foul words. It was an invitation to be listened to. And then he said he wasn't going to work a penny job or drink himself to death. "Life owes me a lot," he teased. Spitting through a knocked-out tooth was convenient. But what even the teachers, accustomed to their pups going to college at best, didn't expect was that Jeremy applied to medical school and passed the competition. There was no one around him with whom he could share his designs. "You'll learn, biology teacher. You're good. We'll be treated by you later." And Jeremy wanted to deal with the superpowers of man, and to understand what nature gave him, and what these terrible people, who almost broke his life, hoped to get from him. His brain was designed for scientific work. None of his classmates had such a tenacious memory, such a pronounced ability to generalize and analyze. And in his senior year, his mentors had already said definitely that Jeremy had a place in graduate school, that he should think about a PhD. As he had no one to support him, he worked part-time at the hospital in his spare time. He did not want to stay in a hostel, and as soon as the opportunity arose, he rented an apartment. That was the beginning of his library and card catalog. He collected very specific things. There was a lot written on the subject that interested him, but he did not want to chase sensation but facts. And also he was tracing the path of the very circus that seemed immortal. One could leaf through old newspapers, go deeper and deeper into the past, and be convinced the troupe existed even then. It kept traveling around the world. But at the same time it described a circle, invariably at regular intervals returning to the same city. And the circusmen stayed there not in hotels, not in the most run-down motels. The same house beckoned them, as if it were their own. They put their carriages in its yard, and from here they started their new wanderings around the world. More and more often the Ouroboros came to Jeremy's mind the most ancient symbol, the snake biting its tail, the alternation of creation and destruction, life and death, the beginning of a new cycle. And if he mosaicked all the evidence he had gathered, if he could believe the picture, it was only a matter of time before the new cycle began. In a short time they would be there again, in that town, near that house. It was frightening to think about. I wondered if that girl who had saved him back then had survived. Jeremy thought of her from time to time. He hoped she hadn't had to pay for it. But himself, was he still so attractive to them, to this traveling troupe? He felt he was. Which meant he had to go there to test a hunch. And to do that, he needed the circus people to know where he was. This whole thing was a hell of a bait and switch. He knew he'd get drunk, but it had to be done thoughtfully, to get to that point that only you can feel, when the fear that my mom that was a century ago called ugly recedes. Instead of fear comes the feeling that now, as in some game, you are going to take up a sword and go to crush your enemies left and right, not thinking that you yourself might fall from a dashing blow. He needed that kick from his subconscious to cross a line he'd been afraid to think about before. And at the same time, he didn't want to get so full that there would be a feeling of swings, and he'd be dizzy, and the fear would be replaced by despair at his own helplessness. Apparently, the higher powers decided that he was doing the right thing, because the hotel was found instantly. And according to the map, it was near the train station. It didn't matter to Jeremy what conditions he would live in. If he was alive in a few days, he would leave this city and try to forget it forever. And if he had nightmares in his sleep, it wouldn't be a lousy number. He threw his bag on the bed, locked the door again, and went to find a bar where he could sit for a long time without being disturbed. A boulevard crossing the center of the city started from the station square. Everything here was so bright, so light, so benign, and so far from what his soul was full of. 2 white trees like emerald candles, beds of roses, souvenir stands. He peered around the bar with the kind of painful scrutiny that a sick man would look for in a drugstore. At last he caught sight of the basement. The heavy door at this hour of the morning was open to his surprise, and he hurried downstairs. And in the cool, semi-darkness of the place, you couldn't tell the day was just beginning. Not a single customer yet. Jeremy was the first. He chose a table in the far corner, asked the bartender to open a bottle of whiskey, and bring some kind of appetizer. He thought he'd learned to control himself. But the whiskey had come earlier, and Jeremy poured himself a bottle of whiskey, so much so that the bartender would have called it not a double but a quintuple whiskey, and drank it like water. That's what he'd come to. It was only then that he let go a little, the tight knot of fear loosened, and he could breathe. The waitress came over and put a plate of sausage and breadcrumbs in front of him. There's nothing else. He heard her apologetic tone and thought he should pay at once. He didn't know how his sit-down was going to end. The girl immediately understood his gesture. It meant both no change and get out of here. It seemed like an hour or more had passed. Jeremy was sipping his whiskey now and thinking about the fact that there was no way he was going to be able to play in the open. The odds were too unequal, and there was very little chance that the trap he had planned would work. He realized that this time he was risking not his freedom, but his life. And these creatures were capable of such a thing that death would seem like deliverance. Someone sat down across from him, and Jeremy looked up. It was a girl, very young, in a blue dress. She kept her eyes on him, and he thought the waitress had called her. Maybe she felt sorry for him. From the outside, he must have epitomized bitter loneliness. Or maybe she thought he was a tempting prey, easy to get her hands on for money. "Would you like a drink?" he asked the girl. "Then get yourself a glass." It seemed to him that everyone now wanted to escape the madness of the big by immersing themselves in the small. The girl drank and said something to him, touching his hand lightly. And she was sneaking sausage off the plate, sneaking it, trying to be sneaky. She wanted to look pretty, but she was probably very hungry. Jeremy could see that she was trying to please him. For the first time in a long time, he looked with that attentive gaze in which his gift was awakening. Yeah, she was living on a shoestring. She rented a room for 2 with a friend, and spent the money she earned on clothes. After her poverty-stricken childhood, she was attracted to every brightly colored rag. She couldn't get enough of everything. Now she needed shoes, pink, high heels. But she really liked him young, nice-looking, not pushy. He had to go, damn it, he had to go. He took 2 red bills out of his wallet, placed them on the table, and then took the girl's hand and put her palm down on the bills. "Kathleen," he said, "buy yourself some shoes." He patted her shoulder a little and went on his way, ignoring her shocked face. He knew the address, and it appeared that it was the same boulevard he had to follow all the way to the end. A streetcar rang on his right hand. Here was a photographer, laying out national costumes on a bench, waiting for customers. A store selling shawarma and chibareks. An old building of a polyclinic. Fountains. The boulevard rose upward, and every now and then the level path was replaced by steps, and one could not sink into deep reverie as he wished. One had to remember not to stumble. Finally, when he couldn't wait any longer, Jeremy sighed a deep, convulsive sigh. Shoving his hands in his pockets, he walked toward the house. Toward the house. He expected to find the place dilapidated and desolate, but he stopped in amazement. The house had clearly become truly residential, and the new owner had decided to make it as good as any. The white plastic windows seemed decidedly out of harmony with the brick, which was not even 100 years old. He also noticed the curtains obviously new. What is this doing? Jeremy looked around, as if he wanted to call the people around him as witnesses. He noticed the old man next door, who was looking at him with his eyes shaded from the sun. "No one's home," said the old man. "The landlady hasn't come yet." Jeremy realized that the conversation might be a respite for him, and walked over to the fence that separated 1 yard from the other. "Who's the hostess?" "You don't know." Now the old man's look was suspicious. "What's the matter? Do you want to buy a house?" Not exactly. Well, how, in fact, was to explain everything to an ignorant person. In a few days About here, I have to meet. Friends. They know the landlady well, and I just arrived earlier. "So you're a guest?" The old man went on inquiring. His eyebrows were white and bushy, which made him look menacing. "Children are afraid of such old men. Have you come to visit?" "Sort of." "Can you tell me a little bit about the missus?" "I don't like gossip." The old man wanted to get back to his business, but he said, "Especially in this house, gossiping is not worth it." And that was a clue to a new conversation, because after those words Jeremy couldn't move away from the fence. No amount of force would make him. "I hear there are some bad things going on in this house," he said casually. "Heard from where?" "From whom?" And again the look of those blue eyes, so bright they seemed icy. But hell, he couldn't tell the old man that this house is a kind of dining room for ... After that, the neighbor. "If he says anything, it will be on the phone. Dialing 03, come here. There's a psycho. Take him away before he makes trouble." "I used to live in this town," Jeremy said with the look of a man in a hurry who wanted to talk. "And I remember the circus used to stop here. Right on this lawn." But these words of the old man were unexpectedly convincing. Who indeed could have known about it except the old-timer? "It was a long time ago. You must have been very young. How can you not remember ... Here, everyone who lives around here were afraid that these lunatics would do something crazy. They'd get drunk, set fire to something drunk, God forbid. They'd get into a fight. They didn't. In general, the circus has come here twice in my memory." Jeremy raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yeah, that's the case you were talking about. That was 25 years ago. And before that you still have to measure a quarter. You weren't around then, but I was then, like you are now. Well, it's been 25 years again. Maybe they'll come again. "They will," Jeremy said thoughtfully, yet confidently. "They can't not come." I was surprised it had been so long, and I thought the house had been torn down. At that time it was ownerless. You can't tear this house down that easily. He is himself, but the old man did not continue. "Were you inside?" Jeremy knew he had been, but he could only read his mind when the old man started to remember. And the old man told him that it was strange. For many years he had never established such a relationship with any of the inhabitants of the house that he could easily visit each other. It's like a kaleidoscope. Some lived there, then others I can't remember them all. Once a young couple asked me to feed their cat. They left me the key. They were going somewhere. I went and fed it. Well, it's all right. The old man's gesture begone was completely unexpected. Jeremy flinched. What is it? On the third day, a cat went missing. He disappeared from a locked house. I wanted to give up myself by then. It seems like everything is normal around there. Well, the most ordinary things. But when you walk around the rooms, you start to see the hell of what you see. I've never suffered from nerves. But this is not good at all. There's no animal, that's all. And all the windows are closed. I think, how will I report to the young ones? And they didn't come back. They left, and that was the end of it. I've kept the key to the house ever since. No one's ever asked me for it. The new owners must have changed the lock. It's not the main door, not the front door, but the back door. I see. And tell me about the last hostess. Jeremy knew that a house could change hands in many ways, but only its true owners could pass it on. It's just a girl, Miranda. She inherited it. Only she gave it to her mother-in-law right away. She's the one who's been renovating it. Young people don't need all that. The land, greenhouses. They're not ready to put down roots yet. They've got wind in their heads, going here and there. My mother-in-law doesn't live here yet, but she'll probably move in soon. She's already brought some potted flowers. I don't think they'll survive here. There's not enough light. You wouldn't happen to know how to find Miranda, would you? The old man shrugged. I think she works at a maternity hospital. And there's only one in town. But I can't say for sure whether she is there or not. All the same, Jeremy shook the old man's hand sincerely. Thank you very much. The ... he was lucky the second time, which was much more important. The first time he'd found a suitable hotel at the first request, and there was room. And now, when he looked up the phone number of the maternity hospital on the internet and asked for Miranda, a girl came up. As soon as he started talking about the house, he knew from her startled silence that it was her. Can I meet you? He asked. Jeremy was prepared for Miranda to refuse him, and then he'd come to her in the hospital and lay down his life, but she'd listen to him. The girl doesn't realize that she's destined to be the bloody delicatessen at the meal that's already in progress. And only if they act together will she have a chance. His own chance will increase a little. But there's no risk. What do you want to tell me? Heard Jeremy. Please ... preferably today ... pick any place that is convenient for you. I'll take half an hour tops. She must have heard the pleading intonations in his voice, was silent for a few moments, and then said with determination, Good. There's a little cafe near this house. I'll meet you there. At 4 o'clock. Miranda was almost half an hour late. It wasn't much longer. Sometimes her husband had to wait for her until late in the evening. That meant another woman in labor wasn't doing so well. But now she was standing in this small cafe, which was more like a diner, and squinting at the room. Who should recognize whom he, her, or she, him? She wondered later how she could have thought she wouldn't recognize him at once. A young man was sitting by the window. At first she wondered if there was a movie being filmed somewhere. He looked like the hero of a movie from the 50s. A light-colored coat, dark hair, thin features. And yes, it was him. The same one who had been coming to her in her deepest deaf dreams for many years. He raised his head. He saw at once the picture that stood before her eyes. He small, dirty, exhausted in a cage, and she, pushing on the bolt. They looked at each other, and not a single word was spoken. But they talked. It can't be. It can't be that you got this house. I'm sure this inheritance is from her. She's the one who said you'll remember my gift. Do you know what that means? Yeah, and I don't hold out much hope of surviving. This house is a monster. You should hear it when you walk through it, the way it crunches. It's like it's kneading its bones, stretching, smelling you. A waitress came to their table, and both of them had to return to reality. Miranda wondered what the girl thought of them. They looked like a strange couple with their silent game. Without taking her eyes off Jeremy, she took the menu. Still, she had to make an effort. Tattered pages and worn plastic. Miranda thought her friend must be hungry. She was suddenly hungry too. And that was a sure sign that, despite the approaching danger, she felt a kind of confidence. Usually when she was worried, she had no appetite. But now she wasn't alone. Bring us dumplings. With broth? With sour cream? With tomato? 2 double servings. and a cup of sour cream each. They didn't notice whether they had waited long enough to order. They had too much to say to each other. "How have you been living?" "You're asking me if I've ever forgotten that." "Oh yeah. Dreams?" "In the orphanage they said that I often scream in my sleep. The boys used to wake me up ... when I started studying at the institute. I got hooked on pills." "Antidepressants?" "Yeah." Chuckles. "Are you married?" "How could I get married if I waited every day for them to get to me? They come out of nowhere. If an outsider saw all this, they'd go crazy. We didn't go crazy because we were kids. Kids are more flexible. So no wife. And I don't have kids for the same reason." They glanced over with a bitter smile of equals. "Were you really hoping this would all be over for you if you gave the house to your mother-in-law?" "It hung on me like a weight," she admitted. "I wouldn't have taken it at all. Mine made me. And I also tried to talk myself into it. How do I know it was her gift? And when I went in there, I realized the house couldn't be anything else. It smells like them. Their beasts, their sweat, and their powder. And I'm the only one who smells it, no one else." In everyone's eyes were crazy. They brought the dumplings. Steam was still rising above them. The smell of meat and bay leaf interrupted the memories of the terrible. Both of them gorged themselves on the food. "I've tried to forget," she said when her plate was empty. "Have you?" "And I tried to learn everything I could about them. Because the day would come, the hour would come, and then there would be no getting away from it. I didn't want to be taken warm." "Then explain to me." He shook his head. "Don't ask me how old they are, I don't know. Some of it I had to gather from bits and pieces, some of it is speculation. Sometimes I think they're as old as the earth. Sometimes I think they come from somewhere in the Middle Ages, when people's fears materialized. And where they are now, I don't know either." "Then why did you, We'll draw them up," he said. "Or would you try to run away?" "I shouldn't. You're still so young. You'll suffer for a long time. And in the end, fear will suffocate you anyway. And how do you think you're going to lure them in?" Instead of answering, he closed his eyes. It was easy to do, to be in the cage he remembered, down to every scratch on the iron bars, every crevice in the floorboards. He remembered how many steps along, across, and askew. On the crevice that blew him especially hard on cold days. He would have gnawed out a loophole to escape, but they guarded not only his body but his thoughts, which was far worse. And when this girl opened the door for him, he concentrated on not thinking, not about anything else, only the pain from the nails digging into his palms. But as he gathered on the internet, in libraries, in bookstores, everything that might have touched them, he called on his memory again, painful though it was. But it required separating the grain from the chaff. Figuring out what was true and what was false in memory was the only thing he could rely on. He knew them too well to take certain things on faith. "You're weaker than I am," he said. "You hear only my thoughts and I hear everyone's. But now they're onto you. Maybe it's just revenge. Oh, they're very vindictive. Or maybe they're just hungry. This house isn't the only one. And when they get hungry, they wander into one of the houses like people wander into a diner. Usually it's on a harvest day an hour. This time they'll come for you, but if they know I'm here, they'll come early." "Aye," she asked a little audibly. "And we'll have to make sure the house wakes up early too, so that it will take them, not us, for food." She shook her head fearfully. "You're groping. You're not sure of anything. And we're risking too much. You won't get another chance. Do you have the key to the house?" "I gave everything to my mother-in-law. I can't go to the house alone. She'll definitely follow me. Luckily, my neighbor still has the key. He's had it for ages, but maybe the lock hasn't been changed. Let's go check it out." They were indeed hungry, but only those who knew their true nature could see that. To everyone else, they were just ordinary people who met twice a day at a common table in the caravan, where EVA lived. In the mornings they drank tea, and in the evenings after the shows they stayed up late, the smell of charcoal grilled meat stirring the nostrils of passers-by. But a knowledgeable person would have noticed the twitching of their hands, which had suddenly become dry, the wrinkles on their faces, and the light that sometimes flashed in their eyes. They knew that when they were truly satiated, they would get rid of the signs of age and the hunger that tormented them from within. But they sometimes had to endure long enough, for not every prey was suitable. The prey had to be different from the human herd, and it was not always possible to find a suitable one. Immortality comes at a high price, and not everyone could withstand it. There used to be more of them, many more, but some had fallen behind along the way. This Vera ... she'd asked to be let go, to be left to live near one of their houses. What the hell she was eating there, picking up scum. No wonder she eventually grew old and died. Eve felt her death. She was the most empathetic of them all, always knowing exactly what they needed and how they could get it. So it came naturally that she became senior to them. But never had she met such an attractive prey as that boy. That was why no one dared to infringe on his life. Their power multiplied with him, and he was bound to become one of them sooner or later, if he hadn't escaped. Now they will have to settle for less, much less. Vera is gone, and now their cottage belongs to someone else ... Well, happiness for the owners if they don't mess around. Can you feel it? Miranda asked as they entered the house. Jeremy made a sign with his hand to wait. He stepped as carefully as if he were walking on a taut wire, carefully calibrating his every step, holding his breath. He was afraid to disturb, to wake the house before its time. And yet it seemed to Miranda that something was already beginning to happen. The air wavered slightly, as it would over a campfire. The floorboards crackled a little louder, and the floor seemed to waver slightly. Then Jeremy couldn't stand it, pointed to the new window and raised his eyebrows slightly. "It's the mother-in-law," Miranda whispered hastily. "She's in charge of all the changes around here. I wonder how the house didn't chew her arm off. She is so mediocre that she was probably of no interest to him." And they managed to get the key without any problems. The old man even followed them to see if the young man could open the back door. He had kept the key for so many years, and he was curious. Jeremy saw at once that the key would fit. It slid into the keyhole so easily that it turned on its own. The old man left, and they entered the house. Here not only did the corridor that ran through the entire mansion begin. From here, from the back door, stone steps led down to the cellar. That's where they both went down in the first place. Of course, Peggy Urton, with her great household plans, couldn't help getting to this corner of the house. The cellar was empty, the workmen having removed all the junk that had accumulated there over the years. And the shelving units they'd ordered hadn't arrived yet. Just a dungeon, just a crypt. A ray of light, which seemed blue, fell from a narrow window in the ceiling. Jeremy stood a few feet from the window, his head up. The light had transformed his face. Too, it had lost its natural color, drenched in that dead blue. Jeremy closed his eyes and whispered something inaudible. Miranda realized that the irreversible was happening now. He was calling out to them, and he seemed to have succeeded in reaching their minds. Then he opened his eyes and turned to Miranda, but his gaze was crazy, like that of a frightened child. She took both his hands. "Did you succeed?" He tried to swallow. It didn't work on the first try. "They'll be here tomorrow night." "And what are they?" "They can't believe their happiness." Peggy Urton ventured to spend the first night in her new home. Her bedroom had been ready for a long time. But to be honest, the new owner had dreamed of doing things differently. To organize a housewarming party, to invite her friends, and after a noisy feast, scattered among the rooms to sleep soundly and without dreams. It was a little scary to be alone. But the party was postponed. That friend, without whom it made no sense to organize all this, went to her daughter, and for a long time. She would be back in a month at the earliest, and Peggy Urton couldn't wait that long. "I'm as curious as Eve," she liked to say on every occasion. And now she convinced herself that there was nothing to be afraid of, that this was not some forgotten corner. This was a city, and there were people on the right and on the left. Of course, no one would dare to rob a mansion. It was not like robbing a cottage. But she chided herself for not ordering bars for the windows, and decided to do it soon. She arrived at her new home without telling her son or his wife. With a light load in her hands and a bad headache. She arrived that very evening, a couple hours before sunset. She'd been thinking since morning that she'd make a feast for herself, fry some chops while singing, open some wine. But now the thought of food made her sick. Peggy Urton dropped 2 green pills into the palm of her hand and took a drink of tap water. She thought for a moment and added another pill, for her blood pressure, just in case. Wrinkling her nose and putting her fingers to her temples, it was a little cold in the house, and her hands were still icy. She made her way to the bedroom, lay down, and covered herself with a downy shawl. She expected the pain to continue for a long time, but it suddenly receded. and unnoticed, Peggy Urton fell asleep. "They're sure it'll be business as usual," Jeremy said as they settled by the window. "After all, the deadline, 25 years, is only a few days away. That's why they'll come in to get us, you can be sure of it." They're getting close. Miranda didn't ask now if he'd succeeded in waking the house. She could sense that he was almost awake. The visions that tormented her became brighter. They flashed in succession. Wherever she looked, she saw the victims, their last moments, while for the house itself they were memories pleasant to the point of shivering, gastronomic. Miranda tried to look only at Jeremy. He was her only hope of getting out of here alive. "Why did you become a midwife?" he asked suddenly. "Ever since I've been there, I've just carried the breath of death with me," she said simply. "I wanted to be closer to the birth of life." "Displace it, did you?" "And I wanted to know what kind of power I had been given. Why am I like this? Are there others like me?" They were silent. Maybe it lasted a long time, maybe a few moments. Something warm and sticky dripped down Miranda's cheek. She tried to wipe it away and suddenly realized. The house is drooling. You could hear the panic in her whisper. Instead of answering, he pointed to the window. She didn't understand at first, and then she was numb. There was a lawn in front of the house, lit by the light of lanterns, and there were shadows moving across it. Those tales of the unclean, which seemed so faded and naive now, assured her that the undead didn't reflect in mirrors or give shadows. But now they saw with their own eyes no people, just shadows on the grass. Here a man in a hat, here a woman in a long dress. An old woman with a beak, and more women, and men. Men. The shadows flocked to the front door, which was thoughtfully ajar. Peggy Urton woke up with a pounding heart, as if she'd had a nightmare. She didn't remember the plot of the dream, though, and she didn't understand what there was to be afraid of, but the feeling of dread wouldn't go away. She reached for the phone on the nightstand and turned it on to see what time it was. It showed that she had slept for only a little while, about 2 hours. Everything looked so calm. Moonlight was pouring in through the window, no noise. She was surrounded by things that she herself had chosen in the stores, then commanded the movers who brought them in and arranged them. There was no one and nothing foreign, nothing alien in her room. Only shadows lay on the floor, special nocturnal shadows. But should one be afraid of shadows? And yet something was happening. She looked closely and listened. Everything shook slightly. It couldn't have been an earthquake, for it had never happened in their land. It sounded more like the shaking of a horse that couldn't wait to get out of its seat. Peggy Urton hastily put on her glasses, raked her dressing gown from the chair. She never had premonitions, nor did she believe in them. But the feeling that came over her was so strong, so primal, that she could not help obeying it. Where are those damn slippers? And what on earth is going on, gentlemen? What is it? Miranda whispered. Why did they come dressed like that? She could see sadness, if not doom, in Jeremy's gaze, but his voice was as firm as ever. Maybe he wanted to reassure her with that tone. Like this? Because they've come for us, and no one else is supposed to see them. What do they want to do with us? And I don't know about me, but they want you alive. Not anymore. I mean alive not in the sense that you and I understand it. Most likely they want to make me one of them. But first. I read how they take people. True. It's a legend, but what can we rely on but legends? Nothing else. First, they become our shadows. Can we escape our own shadows? Never. Only the shadow follows the man, but now it will be the other way around. We will have to follow them. But you don't, do you? It's not, is it? Let's run to the basement. Hurry. They shouldn't have been able to turn on the lights, and there shouldn't have been the slightest noise from them. What force helped them not to trip on the steps? Jeremy held Miranda's hand tightly by the wrist. That's how you hold babies. Only the walls flashed. If the house really was surrounded on all sides, it would be a total failure. But they were lucky when they ran up the steps to the back door and opened it. There was nothing but lawn in front of them. The lawn, which here was lighted only by the moon, and the darkening garden beyond it. One last dash. When they reached the lilac bushes, they took cover behind them. Now watch what happens, Jeremy said quietly. She could rather read it on his lips. But what if things don't go your way? If the house is with them? He shrugged. There's nothing more we can do anyway." Several endless languid moments passed. Maybe during this time the circus ghosts were searching the house? And then, Miranda and Jeremy were startled by a sharp bang. It was the front door slamming shut. Then the blows came one after another, but not as hard. It was the slamming of the shutters on the windows. The house clenched its jaws. If someone stood watching the ancient mansion from across the street at this late-night hour, they would probably think they were hallucinating. It was like a stereo picture. When a kind of miracle happens before your eyes, the perspective changes, and you see something no one else sees. The house stood still, but there, inside it, some living organism was clenching its teeth. Huge jaws were walking. Someone invisible was satisfying a fierce hunger. In vain, the prey battered at the closed windows and doors. The desperate screams were silent to everyone. Almost everyone. Only the couple hiding in the lilac bushes behind the house could hear them. Miranda fell to the grass, covering her ears with her hands. She was used to the screams of women in labor, but she couldn't hear these undead cries. "Look at the smoke," she heard Jeremy's voice. Overcoming herself, she raised her head. No one would flood the boiler in the summer. Only in mid-autumn would you see smoke rising from the chimneys above the roofs. But over this house there was smoke. Thick pink changed to red, the color of fire, or blood. The smoke rose to the sky and melted into it. Are we the only ones seeing this too? Or are the neighbors calling the fire department now? Jeremy didn't answer her question. He couldn't take his eyes off the frightening and mesmerizing sight. It took quite some time before the screams subsided. Here was the last faint moan and a ringing silence. The smoke had dried up. And then, Miranda was ready to wipe her eyes. But it wasn't imagined, it was really happening. Right before her eyes, the house began to deteriorate, returning to its true age. Cracks ran down the white walls, the whiteness darkening into a dirty gray. The roof was decrepit, and in some places holes appeared in it. Instead of the now empty black openings, like eye sockets in a decaying skull. The door snapped and hung on one hinge. The outbuilding collapsed, but silently, as if in a silent movie. Now the house in front of them was not a house, but a ruin that was God knows how old. Yin and yang, Ouroboros biting itself by the tail. Everything in the world is interconnected, and the end of one thing becomes the beginning of another, and the beginning inevitably leads to the end. What did it all mean? Miranda felt like she was teetering on the brink of losing her mind. "They're not coming back," Jeremy rose with such difficulty, as if he were as old as these ruins. "It seems they can't exist without each other." The house was too hungry, and his hosts came in handy. They were its last meal. It's all over now. But Miranda couldn't get up. She had no strength. She sat on the ground, ruffling her hair with her hands, which were shaking. She couldn't even cry from the shock. But they heard the crying. A normal human cry. A woman's bitter. "Who's that?" "Neighbors?" Jeremy held out his hand to Miranda and helped her up. A woman stood a few steps away from the house. A heavy figure, robe and barefoot slippers. Miranda squinted, something familiar to her. "Wait, there's no way." "Elena? What brings Peggy here?" "Who?" "My mother-in-law." Miranda let go of Jeremy's hand and ran awkwardly, as if her legs weren't quite right yet. Yes, it was Peggy Urton. She stood there sobbing, putting her fists in her mouth, probably to keep from howling. "What is it? What is it?" she repeated. "How did you get here?" The women, young and old, stood a stone's throw from each other. "Why? The gas couldn't have exploded in here, could it? Why did the whole place collapse?" Peggy Urton was as confused as a small child. "You guys slept here?" Miranda finally got the message. The mother-in-law nodded shallowly. The first night. Rejoice that you made it out in time, that you're alive." Miranda took hold of her head again. "God, they almost killed Vitya's mother. Tell me, did you destroy this place? Maybe you regretted writing the deed of gift to me. You thought you didn't want me to have the house? Why would you do that? Why ruin everything? I mean, it would have gone to you in the end." Miranda looked at her mother-in-law with wide eyes and couldn't understand what she was asking her. "So it's you." Peggy was already howling. "Do you think I'm what?" Miranda covered her eyes. Breathe, she told herself. She had to focus on breathing, or she would collapse right now, right here, just like these walls. This night had cost her too much. The street was no longer quiet. Late passers-by, neighbors running out of their houses. Some were aghast, some were filming the ruins of the house on their phones. Some were calling and demanding to send rescuers and an ambulance. Though why call anyone now, ... The voices were humming, merging into the steady noise of a swarm of bees. Miranda looked back. The clearing behind her was empty. Only the moon, the grass, and the shadows of the sprawling lilac bushes. So how did it end? Jeremy asked. We sold the plot. And they sold it very well. William finally got involved. The place is golden. They grabbed the land with their hands. Of course, everything here will be demolished. The new owner will build. N knew Hosea, and Jeremy said the words, almost syllabically, emphasizing the last one. A very down-to-earth man. He has his own business. He drills wells for people. And he has a big family, a wife and 4 sons. The boys will be out there racing in the garden with their dog. And we bought my mother-in-law a summer house. She cried so much her dream was gone, and all her savings. She spent everything for this house. Her credit card is bare now. She sold her shares. She told us I'd become a beggar. So William picked out a big house for her, big enough for all her friends. I think she's a bit relieved now. Jeremy nodded. They stood at the bus station, waiting for his bus to arrive. He'd wanted to leave yesterday, but Miranda had asked him to wait a day. She wanted to say goodbye to him. She had been on night duty the night before, and now she came running straight from the hospital, tortured. He knew those sunken, and yet somehow peculiarly shining eyes a sign of long sleeplessness and of the fact that the hard duty had ended well. Why don't you stay? She repeated for the 1,500th time. They both knew that he had no one to rush to accept his patience. And they also knew the axiom that he could only stay if they were together. Otherwise, tearing up his soul. It's even harder than fighting ghosts. Shadows. And there was only one moment when he asked her that question, with his eyes. It didn't require a mental conversation, just a look. Do you love me? Will you go away with me? He asked. Her answering look expressed both struggle and anguish at the same time. And that was enough. He couldn't hurt her. She had a debt to the man who had once saved her, and who had taken care of her all these years. The heavy bus slowly pulled out of the parking lot, pulled up to the platform. The doors opened. Go on. Take the window seat. Jeremy put his arms around her and pulled her against him. They stood like that, swaying slightly. She closed her eyes. Never had she felt so peaceful and blissful. Never. Not even in the cradle. You promise? Do you remember? They had said it almost simultaneously. Now they were looking at each other. He wiped the tears from her cheeks with his palm. If ever, anything else ... this devil's circus is similar ... if, even just a premonition. I'll call you. I'll be there. I promise. I remember. He pulled away so gently that she didn't feel it right away. She saw him coming up the steps to the bus. ... It was over. But there was still eternity, the one where evil is only an accident, and where there is no fear of losing each other, for their 2 souls can become one.